Welcome back to Terminus, the come town of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka man with Down syndrome, backstage getting photo op with Dave Mustaine.
And I'm the black metal guy, aka autonomous zone with outdoor brunch seating at $20 a plate.
That seems surprisingly
Unlimited
low.
mimosas.
Okay.
20,
No,
probably 25.
Yeah, with the free mimosas, definitely 25, because, like, people will just use it to do, like, sink or swim, you know? They'll go that they won't eat, they'll just drink the mimosas.
Yeah, no, what you need is, you need the mimosas, you want the mimosas to be affordable for all the comrades, but you also don't want them to be, like, people need to be contributing in order to keep the mimosas coming. It's a kind of cooperative ecosystem.
For too long, the top 1% of this country has had control over 99% of the mimosas. When I am president of the United States of America, I will redistribute all the mimosas. Oh, man.
But then that means nobody gets drunk.
Yeah, but...
we just sort of rework our...
Dude, it's...
rework our sort of means of production to make endless mimosas.
Fully automated luxury mimosas, bro.
That's right. Yes. Anyway, well,
you really wanted to keep going. You wanted to keep going.
Yeah.
Oh man! After our last episode, we should probably restrict our riffing to a degree.
All right. So we got four pretty interesting picks for you again today, I think.
Yeah, these are all real curious records. I wouldn't say there's anything here that's really normie.
Yeah, this is our first like solidly cult episode probably. I think our general heading for the episode is inhumanity, which as an aesthetic or as a quality and as an idea. What does it mean to make inhuman music, or music that deals with a frame of reference beyond the merely human or personal?
Yeah.
And if you listen to black metal or death metal, you probably already have some idea of what that means, right?
Yeah.
Because, it's not exactly... A smart guy I once knew said something to the effect of, death metal lyrics aren't like rock lyrics with the I and the you and the, right? Like, you did this to me.
Yeah, it's always supposed to be more abstract.
Yeah, more abstract and sort of concerned with the sort of the beyond in whatever way.
Yeah.
So the first one we got is the new one by Oppressive Descent, which has the pretty cool title, Alchemy and War. This is out on Red Door Records. It is, as you can probably guess, a black metal album. It's in some ways superficially fairly down the line, but I think it's really well done in a way that I've kind of always wanted to hear. And we'll open up with that one, and then you've got one of your picks.
Yeah, we actually have them chopped. We're not doing halves today. We've got two on each side.
That's true.
So my first pick is the
remix.
This is the closest to a mainstream record we've got. We have the new record from Sickening Horror called Chaos Revamped, released on Pathologically Explicit Recordings. Kind of an interesting choice of label. They usually do gore grind and brutal death type stuff. But Sickening Horror, if you don't remember, were kind of the great white hope of tech death in the late 2000s. Did a record that a lot of people loved back then, and then did several more that a lot of people didn't pay attention to, and I decided to revisit these guys. So what have you got next?
And then we've got Thecodontion, Supercontinent. This is out on Voidhanger Records, which I think is one of the better records that's dedicated to doing arty stuff. I don't think, arty stuff that's still usually pretty solidly metal. I don't... and like any arty label, some of it works, some of it doesn't work, but I think it's a really good label for that sort of avant-garde thing.
Yeah.
And Thecodontion is like, really just I think it's some of the weirdest music I've heard this year, possibly the weirdest thing I've heard this year. It's drum and bass only, and it's, I guess formally it's black death or war metal, but it sounds very unique. And is about mostly about prehistoric geology.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And for the last record of the show, we're reaching back a little bit. This actually came out in May, but I'm a big fan of this band, so I wanted to cover their new record. This is Fluids with Ignorance Exalted, released on Maggot Stomp, who are a label I feel like we might have covered something from before.
We haven't. We've probably referenced them.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
I referenced that one band with the really crazy name.
The slam band from Quebec.
Yeah. Or, no, not the slam band. No. The
and
the one. No. It's. Let me see if I can find it. It's they have a crazy funny name on. It's Sanguisugabog.
Sanguis. Yeah. We were talking about this. Yeah, because they were on Maggot Stomp. So anyway, Fluids is in essence a death grind band heavily inspired by Mortician. But this record is super interesting, and we'll be going into a lot of the musical ideas on it in the backside of this podcast. But
otherwise known as the autism slot.
Yeah, it has become our autism. If you listened last episode, probably something similar is going to happen this time. So, let's jump into it and talk about something a little more reasonable with Oppressive Descent. So, what do you know about this guy?
Yeah. Nothing as reasonable as World War One. It's so what do I know? I don't know very much. What I know is that it's a new thing coming, and that it is, new black metal. It's coming out of Arkansas, which if you told me
Wait, are you talking about Oppressive Descent?
Yeah, pretty sure.
No, he's out of Portland, Oregon, bro.
Jesus. Oh, is that where Red Door is? Maybe that's where the label is then.
I was just looking it up on Metal Archives, and it says he's from Portland, so I don't know. It looks like the other bands.
Here, let's see. I'm going to have to cut some of this. But, it says, the tags on the Bandcamp say, War Metal Arkansas. No, Red Door Records is in Arkansas. Sorry,
okay.
My bad. Red Door is in Arkansas, so this guy's from Portland. Okay.
Yeah.
I would put this in the category of sort of top tier cult black metal. This is a one-man band where you're never really going to think about the fact that it's a one-man band other than that it puts certain restrictions on the format.
Yeah.
I would group it in the two bands that it reminds me of most in terms of the general league it's in and the general mood are Odal from Germany. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I think I listened to some of their older stuff. I don't remember it very well, though.
Yeah, Odal is an really excellent German band that has uses relatively simple guitar technique of the kind that, the sort of modified sliding power chord stuff that you get from wherever you want, right? Satanic War Master, Seigneur Voland, all of that.
Yeah.
That kind of sliding guitar technique, but with a lot of leads and a just much, much deeper and more nuanced sense of harmony than most bands in that vein get.
Yeah.
And they go for a sort of very capital R romantic Germanic feeling. A lot of the songs have a kind of yearning and ecstatic vibe. Oppressive Descent also, I think, sounds German and French. It sounds very sort of like old world Central and Western European.
Yeah.
Pagan Hellfire, if you're not familiar, are probably... Odal's not a one-man band, I should also say. It's just relatively lo-fi, right?
Yeah.
Pagan Hellfire is a one-man band from, I believe, Nova Scotia. And he's been incredibly reliable over a very long period of time, and produces this kind of stark, it has melodies in it, and it has a bit of an epic feel, but it's not sort of triumphant. It's not glorious. It's not conventionally glorious. It's sort of more just bleak and grim and warlike. And this album sort of, Oppressive Descent blends this sort of spectrum of grim, it's just sort of a bleak, relentless, warlike aesthetic with this sort of wildly yearning melodies. I have here as the theme tag for this album, sort of inhumanity through the juxtaposition of mechanized force and striving will.
You can write for Vice with that sort of diction.
Oh yeah, I think you'd get instantly fired from Vice for writing that.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Oh my God, the black metal columnist likes black metal. Let's lead off with, and I think we've both got some other reference points for this that we'll bring in. I think for both of us, this record brought out, we both read this through bands that are obsessions of ours.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we were arguing about it a little bit yesterday, and I listened to the record a couple more times kind of with your frame of reference, and I still kind of saw it through my own. So I guess this might be one of those records that's a little bit of a Rorschach test for what you're interested in and where your ear goes immediately.
I think in terms of riff by riff construction, I'm closer to your perspective. I think the overall gestalt is different. So let's go. So
okay.
So what's your perspective? Let's lead with one of your picks. I think you picked the real big riff moments on this album.
Yeah, which are obviously, because I am a simple boy that likes consonant black metal, are the moments that appeal to me the most. So, let's just play the sample real quick, and I'll talk about my kind of overall feelings about it. Yeah. So, this is off the track, Irradiant Bastions of Endless Spite. And let me just
Dude knows how to title a song.
Very dramatic, if nothing else. So let's just give this clip a listen, and we'll talk a little bit about it. So, basically what I'm detecting from that is going to be a lot of what I'm hearing on the record. The overwhelming thing that I hear is a huge influence from mutilation. I think of this record as more French than you do, I think, because a lot of your reference points are coming from Germany, or we'll talk about a little bit later, Sweden. But for me, there's a very traditionally French vibe. And the first riff you heard in that sequence would be very comfortable on a, mid-career mutilation record, the kind of forgotten ones like Black Millennium and stuff like that, or Rottenkönig.
I think that's right. I mean, I don't know mutilation after Vampires of Black Imperial Blood, but it even wouldn't be crazy on that album, right?
Yeah, but the sort of more up-tempo kind of rock rhythm there is something that he would explore a lot more on those mid records. And then
interval-wise, also Celestia is another. If I tried to think of French bands that this reminded me of, and it's sort of like French bands that have a sort of somewhat depressive quality to them, or a melancholy quality, but are still real black metal. Celestia with two eyes comes up.
Yeah,
there.
You've mentioned them a couple times on the show, I think.
All right. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, and then, but what you hear on that, the second side of that riff, you've got one of those hybrid riffs we talk about that's opening with kind of a hate force drone chord, sustained for a long time, but then the interval it goes into after that is directly from Forest. So a lot of what I'm hearing on this record, I mean, it's a pastiche of things from all over the place. I hear French, I hear Finnish, I hear Ukrainian and Russian. But that's probably what makes the album interesting to me, is there is a sort of pastiche effect that goes on in the construction of these riffs that makes them on a riff-by-riff basis very interesting, I think, especially as a guitarist. Like, this made me want to kind of break out the guitar and be like, okay, just because there's little 3-note patterns that you've heard 1,000 times before, but they're all juxtaposed with each other in new configurations.
Yes. He's really good at, so the hybrid riff, I hear what you're saying, like, it's hybrid riff on band to band, that riff. I love that riff. It's like, the sort of, it's a very, in some sense, it's an organically Slavic riff. He's just synthesizing Slav ideas. But I for sure hear the hate forest to forest thing. That totally makes sense, right? Yeah. It resolves into this more epic consonant thing that Hate Forest didn't really do, if at all, until Sorrows.
And there's a lot of moments on this record where he'll channel some of the darker Blazebirth Hall stuff, like Raven Dark and stuff like that.
Yeah, so he's good at a lot of the darker Blazebirth Hall stuff. Even at the end of this passage, it sort of drops. There's a sort of, I don't know if it's a key change exactly, but it sort of suddenly toggles between consonant and dissonant, and it goes into that more sort of da da da, and then it just lifts the bass, right? That's a little bit like that. To me, I hear like Emperor riff, but you'd also get that kind of effect in Blazebirth, in the more abstract, dark Blazebirth Hall stuff. But yeah, so he's really good. I think, so you've identified one way that this guy's really good at breaking out of some of the color by numbers quality that you get even in very good sort of lo-fi black metal or cult black metal. And it's got a very craftsman-like quality to it, where and I think there's one thing I would take issue with in the way you're phrasing it, which is just, to me, pastiche rings of superficiality. You know what I mean?
I don't mean it like that. Just in the sense
I know you didn't. Yeah.
Just in the sense that a lot of our favorite extreme metal records are pastiche, like you always talk about Neurosis. Here's 10 bands we want to sound like.
Oh, sure, yeah. I think when I hear the word pastiche, it's more like sort of shallow eclecticism.
Yeah,
like I always sort of associated pastiche with sort of things just pulled without much regard for their inner connections.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of it more as like a methodology rather than a qualitative statement.
Yes, he's drawing from, he's not working, he hasn't. Yeah, so that's totally right. He's not pulling from any one of these narrow micro styles or traditions. Yeah. Right? There's something that unifies all these bands, from Mutilation to Hate Forest to Odal, to anyone else you want to name, which is this kind of like top tier elitist black metal that isn't in the canonical second or third wave. Right? Mm-hmm.
Well, let's listen to another sample. Let's listen to one of yours, and we can talk a little more.
So this one is like, in some sense, I love sampling things that are quote unquote boring, because I'm interested in sort of like can a person do bread and butter, repetitive, aggressive parts of a song well?
Yeah.
And there's something interesting to me about the structure. This is just, I try to give an example of this kind of sophisticated way he breaks out of certain color by numbers approaches to structure. So this is from the title track, Alchemy and War.
All right, let's give that a try.
Mm-hmm. so those are some black metal riffs.
Yeah, one thing I do appreciate is this guy's... One, I appreciate that his riffs are very long.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're talking about, like, full, like kind of 4-line, like, 16-bar riffs.
Sometimes longer.
Sometimes longer. Sometimes you'll get, like, a 32 in there, which I do appreciate. But also, I think it's interesting... I will say, for the record, this is my first time listening on headphones. I was listening on speakers before, and getting a little bit more of the tone color to the riffs does make parts like that more interesting. Because if you're just listening on speakers without a lot of bass presence, it'll just come off sort of brackish and noisy. But that was interesting.
Like, oh, I've heard some thrashing black metal before.
Yeah,
right.
But then what's interesting is his technique of kind of redirecting riffs halfway through. Like, he'll do a couple repetitions of a riff, go into another half repetition, and then veer it off in a different direction into a new idea.
The way I was going to describe it is we start off that sample pretty much on this kind of what you could call like another sort of build riff or charge up riff, in a pop song it'd be a pre-chorus, but it has its own sort of cathartic, triumphant vibe. And then it drops into this charging part, which I love. I love black metal that has not superficial black thrash crap over riffs like that, but like sort of that has a propulsive feel and keeps some of the mystical quality. So that sort of buzzing. It's a little bit like the Hate Forest riff from the last one, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a distinct quality where it seems clear that this is a guy who is trying not to wet himself too much to an individual style or an individual like scene, so to speak.
Yes, and so one thing I like about the skank beat is he's got this heavy cymbal. He's got like the crash on every single 4 beat, and it's playing against the skank beat, and so it creates this sort of like propulsion, but a heaviness with slowness in it.
Yeah.
And it gets real force. So he goes back, he drops back into the thrashing part, and then he turns around. The turnaround on the thrash riff becomes the end of the charge up riff, right?
Yeah.
And then you go launch back into the thing, and then you get the charge up riff again, and then you go bam, sort of like climax riff, right?
Yeah.
And that to me is so much more, like you said, what it's good at is breaking out of the 8 of this, 16 of that sort of segmented composition thing.
Which is typically something you see in one-man, like, auteur projects.
Exactly, yeah. And, sometimes it's great, right? The good example, to me, like someone who, the Finnish bands that we both like are generally like that. And there are ways of making it sound more seamless, but it's still segmented. This is, very flowing. The whole thing. And he has he thinks long-term about composition. Another thing I wanted to say real quick about charge-up riffs, which I was going to say about Irradiant Bastions, is that Hate Forest riff, which leads into some, in the part we sampled, it leads into this sort of Storming Emperor part. It eventually goes to a climax. That's a quote-unquote charge-up riff, but it's actually the center of that song.
Well, by charge-up, do you mean like a tension builder, basically?
Sort of winding up, yeah. It doesn't repeat very long, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I wrote Irradiant Bastions, and you know me, that Hate Forest riff would repeat 32 times.
I was about to say, you would play it for about 7 minutes.
Yeah, play it about 7 minutes, change to double bass, hardcore breakdown, screaming. But like, so he uses it as a charge-up riff, and to some extent, for somebody like me who's brainless, that can almost be a little bit of it. When some bands do that, they like repeat a riff you really like. They use a riff you really like only like 2 times, and then you're like, shit, a tease. But he knows it's a great riff, and it's the unifying thing that cycles back throughout the song.
Yeah, it keeps coming back as a motif.
So there's a lot of attention to riffs that other people would use as filler. Like we talk about, you only like the melodic parts of Satanic War Master, right?
Yeah.
And his weakness, and I love Satanic War Master. I think his weakness is sometimes, and the weakness of people influenced by him and things like that, is that there can be certain kinds of placeholder riffs, right? Yeah. Okay, so next we're going to another, your next sample, which I think is the biggest moment on the album, right?
It probably is like the most climactic moment. It's the I think it's kind of unquestionably the best single riff on the record. It's really interesting. I described it as sort of like Gothic meets Roman quality. It's got this.
Yeah.
It's like imagine mutilation but triumphant or something. So let's just give it a try.
That's accurate.
All right, so let's give this a listen, and then I'll talk about some of my more critical points with this record. Yeah, so that's one of the best riffs of the year.
Agreed.
That's outstanding, and for my issues with the record, which I'll get into in a little bit, this is what, like, that moment in and of itself is what makes me interested in this band going forward. Because that is... You can tell that it's pulling from all sorts of ideas. It's pulling from French, it's pulling from Ukrainian, it's pulling from Finnish.
Yep.
But the end result is really not comparable to anything else out there. There's a real bravery to just how ostentatious that riff is. Because you got to think the first half of it is absurd enough that da do da 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 da, and then he punches it up an octave. Yeah, he punches it up an octave and then goes for that kind of folky satanic War Master thing there. But ultimately, it's
horn. It's almost like on a horn album.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. It's got that Alpine quality, so it's completely unlike anything I've heard. I hear the reference points, but it's not a riff that would go with any other band.
So here's a funny thing. Yes. So first of all, this riff is fantastic. Also, he brings it back later in the song.
Yeah.
He brings it back with blasting, as he should, right? It becomes it goes from a sort of, a yearning romantic moment to a sort of storming black metal riff.
I would like to interject with, I like that, like, in that first time he plays it, he's not forgetting the hardcore. He's basically doing like a metalcore thing where he's dropping out the kick drum and then throwing it back in when the riff like storms into that second half. I mean, it's good. That's a smart application of those techniques.
It's got a very rippling, flowing, the whole way this guy writes melody. He understands something about, I think he probably listens to classical music, and I'm sure he listens to, like, obviously black metal's not getting it straight from the source in a lot of ways, but I'm sure he listens to classical music. I'm sure he listens to sort of like, it sounds like a lot of it gives a vague feeling of like early 20th century popular song kind of stuff, where these like sort of romantic tropes are still around. I that's a vague idea.
No, right? I know what you're talking about, especially coming out of Western Europe, that sort of like pining World War I era.
A little bit cabaret, not cabaret in the sort of like way we talked about with Odraza, which is like Pest Noir, right? But cabaret in a more sort of like, you put one last record on the gramophone before standing up with the rest of the officers and, going out to go over the top, right?
It's like you're listening to like a Gloomy Sunday or something,
It's got, so he goes into a blast riff and he just starts layering guitars under the blast riff.
Yeah.
And again, people often just don't do that, or they just have a static rhythm guitar track playing power chords that under the other modified power chord track that, if you're lucky, the rhythm track does something contrapuntal.
Yeah.
This guy just starts layering. You get the standard riff. You get like a thrashing sort of modified satanic war mastery modified power chord thing under it. You get a just pure buzz under it. It's fantastic. And a thing that I want to point out, see, you said it cascades. So I love this band, and I'm not accusing them of plagiarism. However,
there's no such thing as plagiarism in metal. Who gives a shit?
I agree. Yeah, no, we don't fucking care. I mean, this really, whether he heard it or not, this really resonates with a few of the riffs, but I'm thinking of one in particular which I haven't found on Vehemence's Par la Sang Versailles. Yeah. This is part of that new wave of sort of French chivalric black metal that I think you would really like, but you
keep mentioning that. I really have to check that out.
Yeah. Our Lock was doing it forever before it was cool. They're awesome as well. You could name more. But there are these rolling, triumphant riffs whether or not he heard it, right? It doesn't. It's voiced differently here, and it's not the same riff, right? That whole bump up an octave thing he does is totally distinctive, right? Mm-hmm. And the mood and the coloring of it is all different. The sort of Vehemence is just sort of like, just triumphant kind of, French chivalry kind of vibe, right? But you do get, another thing is like, if you combine the Gothic and the Roman or whatever, you get Charlemagne. You get Franks and Romans, right? You get kind of a medieval French feel. So there's a bit of that here for sure. Basically just what he does. Also, Unfettered Gleam of Lucifer's Wings. Yeah. Brilliant song title. That's something that leads me to something I want to say about it real quick, which is a thing I like about this is that it's that not just it's not just the unsegmented approach to songwriting, the sort of free-flowing classical style imagination and melody, or the fusion of styles. With the fusion of these different micro styles, right? Yeah. It's also the fusion of sort of themes. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine sort of that like black metal kind of fragments after the early 90s into people who are preoccupied with different parts of what these Scandinavians are doing, right?
Yeah. They hone in on the things that are personally meaningful.
Yeah, they want to develop certain potentials, right? And that makes sense and is healthy, right? Yeah. This is sort of trying to bring that back together. So if you try to describe it thematically, well, this album starts with a fairly disturbing sample of what sounds like horses getting shelled. It has the aesthetic in the song titles, in the guy, in the album art. It has a kind of World War I-esque sort of total war aesthetic. It also has sort of this kind of mystical medieval resonances kicking in, right? Like Alchemy and War or Irradiant Bastions. It also has Satanism, but you don't hear it as Satan like spooky bad man Satan, like Satan doing everything the opposite of God, like Satan, like, fucking Jesus in the butt, right? It's more like, it's much more, a Satan that taps into all these other cultural currents, right?
It's definitely bound to, like a folk tradition.
Yeah. It's in the way that Emperor's Satan, on the one hand, was Odin, it was the Nietzschean aristocrat, it was Milton's heroic Satan. Here, Satan is also probably, Mephistopheles and Faust, very Central European. It's this sort of thing that all these elements are being synthesized and coming together and restoring some of that. In the early black metal, you could almost call it confusion, but I think that's part of what made it good, right? So you have Unfettered Gleam of Lucifer's Wings, just you can see him fly Lucifer over London or whatever, right? And then we get to Unquiet on the Western Front, which is this sprawl, World War I again, and this is the kind of the sprawling magnum opus at the back end of the album, right?
All right, so let's give that a try.
Yeah, cool. listening to that one.
No, that's really good, and it's interesting. Again, that's like one of the only samples that we've played thus far where you can clearly hear like the Sargeist section in it, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's like
which one? Yeah.
It's like in the second quarter of that one really long riff, there's a very Sargeist passage. So
it's. Oh yeah, so yeah, did you want to?
I
want to
get so
more critical. Okay.
I guess, but I mean, honestly, while listening to you talk about it and listening to it on headphones, which has made a surprisingly big difference, I think I'm more charitable towards this album than I was before.
Nice.
But one thing I did realize last night after we'd been talking about it a little bit is what this really reminds me of, and I want to get your feedback on this, is this really reminds me of a more high-minded, more musically sophisticated version of the perverse homage bands from like 5 years ago. Do you remember them, like Sanguine Relic and Orgy of Carrion and stuff like that?
Sanguine Relic still exists, but I've never really listened to them.
Yeah, no, all those bands still exist, but they were a very flash-in-the-pan thing like 5 years ago. Like, literally, we're talking about like 2015, 2016, and that was about it.
Interestingly, I think that's a trend. I think they initiated a trend that's still rolling as a trend.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
I think...
But yeah, I don't really know that scene. It's like vampiric French BM, right?
It's an attempt at resurrecting mutilation. And while I do really like those bands, like Sanguine Relic, I think they're cool, they do tremendously misunderstand what mutilation is about, because they think it's raw black metal that is theatrical vampire music, which is a cool aesthetic, but also not what mutilation totally was.
Oh, sure. No. Mutilation's not about being cool.
Yeah. So they did like a cool version of it, but then I guess, and this is very judgmental of me, but all those...
Oh, I'm so surprised.
But all these kinds of bands came out of, like, 3 places. They were coming out of Brooklyn, they were coming out of Boston, and they were coming out of Portland. And you can see... And you can see where I'm going with this shit. They were coming out of, like, either they were, like, rejects from the Cascadian scene, or they were, like, rejects of the hipster black metal scene in New York. And I don't...
Well, rejects, I think, in a positive sense. Defectors from.
Yeah, or they have like...
These people didn't want to be wolves in the throne room, or fucking, like, Krallis.
Hold on, a lot of the guys in these bands have priors in bands like those, so let's not, let's not say that it was just, they realized the glory of black metal and they departed from it. No, I don't...
Well,
I don't hate them. No, I'm just saying, it's like, it can be both. It can be both. I'm not saying that they don't really appreciate it, but there is a hipster-adjacent quality to some of this stuff that sticks in my craw in a way. And I think a lot of it has to do with that very oversaturated, like, white noisy Black Silas production style, which I think I just might be fucking over at this point. Because it feels like there's, like, a patch in Reaper or Pro Tools they're just putting on top of these fucking records. You know what I mean?
I guess something about the production. The production to me is fairly...
Like, the noisy fried thing with, like, that layer of static in it, it's like...
I guess I don't know those other bands, so I don't know. But to me, it's a much warmer and more powerful sound than you'd expect with some of this.
Well, that's because
like Sanguine Relic is I know very necro, right?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree. I mean, it's cassette black metal. I mean,
this is not cassette black metal.
Yeah, and I will say
sound to it, right?
What's fair, the differentiating part is that Oppressive Descent is not very obviously influenced by like the LLN, which a lot of the perverse homage bands were.
Yes, I think it's going for a very different effect.
No, yeah, it definitely is.
It's and it's not it's certainly not misinterpreting mutilation because it's trying to take it to a different place. Okay, so, it's fair to go hard in that way. Let me try to come back at that. It's like, I think first of all, things like I think something that happened in American black metal in our time, since we were, young autists, being, reviling hipster bands, is that a lot of dudes who got into the music at about the same time as us may have started in trendier walks, and some of them continued and kept making worse and worse music.
Yeah.
And others actually got into black metal. And, you know, sort of just started just walking a different path, I think. You know, with Brooklyn, like, you've got, right, there's the gap between all of the trendy bands that we don't really even need to talk about.
Yeah.
And many bands that sound more quote-unquote black metal, but are still obviously just sort of disposable substitute.
Yeah.
And, you know, then like the House of First Light bands, who definitely have a mannered and aesthetic quality, but that's not remotely hipstery. It's sort of maybe deeply contrarian black metal that sort of tries to strip itself of qualities that people normally seek in black metal.
Yeah.
Like weird, abstract, you know, Blaze Hall stuff. In Portland has two groups of people in it, as far as I can tell sociologically. Portland has crust punk, hipster, whatever dudes who are like, you know, playing these shitty fake black metal bands or crust bands and, you know, yada yada. And it also has people living around the city and possibly in it who are more like seriously committed to the
isolationist,
autarkic nature traditionalist black metal thing.
Yeah.
Yes. There are serious around Portland, there are serious black metal people. One of the highest concentrations in the U.S., I think.
I'm sure that there are. It's just
I'm looking at this guy's background, and I see that he's... Interestingly, this did remind me of Luvia, and in fact, this guy drummed for Luvia.
Okay.
I knew I'd heard his name before. Do you remember Luvia? Or Uvia? Yeah, it was pretty good. They were sort of a flash in the pan band, and I think they kept releasing music and then maybe just stopped. But he drummed in The Rain in Endless Fall before it became Uvia.
Oh. Okay.
But like Uvia was sort of popular, but they weren't really hipster. I'd say it anticipates the more melodic stuff now, but it was kind of melancholic, grim, highly repetitive, and had a similar kind of production. He's also in band. I look at the list of bands, and it seems like he's been in just legit stuff, you know.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily like accusing this guy of anything. It's more like that's like the sense that I get from a lot of the stuff, like a similarity.
But do you get it from this? I get how you're connecting it to those bands, but do you get it from this record? Because I don't hear anything remotely hipstery about this.
Well, I mean, you've already said that you haven't listened to any of the like Brooklyn, Boston adjacent perverse homage stuff, so... Which is maybe not hipster, but definitely associated with, like, mysterious guy hardcore, as you would say. When mysterious guy hardcore dudes get really into vampires and shit, they kind of start doing stuff that sounds like Sanguine Relic. Which, again, I don't necessarily
I think that's one of the more positive sides of the U.S. I think the side that was more productive was ultimately the mysterious guy hardcore than, like, say, the sort of crusty nature stuff or the art school stuff.
Well, either way, this is just kind of like me spitballing like shit that I detect. I'm interested in this band. I like this record, but that's just where some of my reticence came from originally.
A band that comes out of the mysterious guy scene. A lot of the bands around Knife Vision came out of the mysterious guy scene. Geheimnisvoll was you can sort of, again, hear that in the stylization, but they were just a really good Seigneur Voland worship band. Yeah. I think they broke up, but anyway, so, okay, we've argued a lot about that. I think, and this, I guess, there's one last thing I wanted to, I guess I saved this to the end, but I think the thing this reminds me of in terms of going with sort of the idea of full spectrum black metal here and integrating a lot of things, it reminds me a lot of Dawn, which is one of my favorite bands, extremely underrated Swedish band, in the category of bands that are difficult to imitate. Yeah. Dawn has this sort of, again, this seemingly hard to pin down, but very definite aesthetic, where you get this sort of satanic stuff, you get the medieval aristocrat stuff, you get the modern Total War stuff, whatever. And it's, what they have is the sort of the impulse that connects all those things. They distill, and it's sort of it's highly melodic, but it's not sort of, it's not like the Sargeist thing. It's not like the modern French thing. The melodies are, even when they're consonant, they're often extremely stern and grim. And this album has a lot of that. And the production quality also has more body in it than a lot of modern cult stuff. And that full body production reminds me of these Swedish bands. The other one, reference point, is Nidden Division 187.
Which is one of my favorite bands of all time.
Yes, and also something that I like a lot.
And a side project of Dawn.
Yeah, shares members with Dawn, shares members with Thy Primordial, which I hadn't heard till the other week, and I got a shout out to the guy who made me check them out. But it's sort of, this album has that sort of flowing romantic melody blended with a hostile and inhuman aesthetic. And it's, and Unquiet on the Western Front has the sprawling quality that all the Dawn songs have on Slaughter Sun, Crown of the Triarchy.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think this guy pulls off something Dawn was a little awkward with sometimes. Dawn was so neoclassical in the songwriting, that sometimes they'd write riffs that should sort of turn around and flow into other riffs, but they'd repeat them because it was black metal. So you get a classical turnaround looping back on itself.
Yeah. And
this guy does a really nice job, in some sense because it's less ambitious, but he unifies black metal repetition with this kind of flowing, seamless songwriting in a way that I think is pretty convincing. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I wanted also, at the end of the last show, we brought in some literary sources. I think we'll, just some reference points that are cool and very, very metal. You're going to have one with Fluids this time.
Yeah, I do.
Maybe I'll dig another one out. But what this reminds me of is, what the whole album reminds me of, that sort of phrase I had at the beginning, juxtaposition of mechanized force and striving will, right? Is this idea of sort of, in the midst of the sort of the impersonal forces of war, right? Which in some sense are people commandeering raw forces of nature and unleashing them, right? And becoming something much different than people. What is the individual to do? What are people to do? How do you relate to that in an active way? And how do you internalize and channel some of that power instead of just being its victim, right?
Yeah.
And in some sense rise above it. So here's a really good passage from Ernst Jünger's Storm of Steel. Anyone who likes black metal or death metal would probably love this book. It's an extremely honest, honest, gritty, and at times strangely beautiful account of World War I. And this is sort of, this is his recount of the Battle of Langemark, where his platoon or company they're dug in behind a road, and the shells are falling on the road and striking the cobbles in front of them as they sort of cower. And he does the, and he's sort of looking out over the top as the shells fall. I chewed my pipe, my helmet pressed onto my forehead, and stared at the pave whose stones showered sparks under the bursting lumps of metal. And I succeeded in philosophizing myself into courage. The most remarkable thoughts shot through my head. I took a trashy French novel, Le Vautour de la Sierra, that I had picked up at Cambrai, into lively consideration. I repeated several times to myself a saying of Ariosto, a great heart cares nothing for death when it comes, so long as it be glorious. It may seem extraordinary, but it helped me to keep control over myself. When the shells gave our ears a little peace, I heard fragments of the beautiful song from The Black Whale of Ascalon, close beside me, and I thought that my friend Caius must have had a drop too much. They all drank in the trenches. Yeah. Everyone has his own manner of calming his nerves. At the end of it, a large splinter struck my hand. Caius took out a torch. We found only a scratch. Hours such as these were without doubt the most awful of the whole war. You cower in a heap alone in a hole and feel yourself the victim of the pitiless thirst for destruction. With horror you feel that all your intelligence, your capacities, your bodily and spiritual characteristics have become utterly meaningless and absurd. While you think it, the lump of metal that will crush you to a shapeless nothing may have started on its course. Your discomfort is concentrated in your ear that tries to distinguish amid the uproar the swirl of your own death rushing near. It is dark, too, and you must find in yourself alone all the strength for holding out. You can't get up and with a blasé laugh light a cigarette in the wondering sight of your companions. Nor can you be encouraged by the sight of your friend clipping a monocle into his eye to observe a hit on the traverse close beside you, all things that officers did at other times. You know that not even a cock will crow when you are hit. Well, why don't you jump up and rush into the night till you collapse in safety behind a bush like an exhausted animal? Why do you hang on there all the time, you and your braves? There are no superior officers to see you. Yet someone watches you. Unknown perhaps to yourself, there is someone within you who keeps you to your post by the power of two mighty spells, duty and honor. You know that this is your place in the battle, and that a whole people relies on you to do your job. You feel, if I leave my post, I am a coward in my own eyes, a wretch who will ever after blush at every word of praise. You clench your teeth and stay. All of us held on that evening, all who lay along that dark Flanders road. Anyway. Does that not sort of capture the vibe on this album?
I mean, to a degree, I think you read more into the like warlike stuff of this than I do, but that's fine.
All right. It's I think you just gotta. I think when you've got cues in. When you've got little cues in the titles and little cues in the imagery and stuff, you've got to see where you can go with those.
I mean, I get it. It's I get the World War I influence. I don't think of it as musically that similar to those more like warlike bands that you described. But...
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. All right. So do we want to end this segment and then,
we probably fucking should. It's been almost an hour. All right,
Jesus.
So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with a couple records we'll probably get through a little bit faster. All right, so next up, we've got Sickening Horror, who I think you didn't have any familiarity with before this, right?
No, this is the sort of thing... No, and I quite enjoyed it, you know?
Yeah.
It's... I knew just enough about tech death to recognize that this kind of sounded like Psychroptic, or the early Psychroptic stuff.
Yeah.
But what it reminds me of in a good way, I think, my thought was, it reminds me of the sort of shit I heard on college radio when I was first encountering extreme metal.
Yeah.
And more than that, it reminds me of what normal people think of when they think of death metal. Does that make sense? And I think when I was younger, even when I was just mostly familiar with hardcore and various metal-derived things, when I thought of death metal, it, you know, like, I mean, I think if I was a teen, if I knew something like Dismember existed or something, I probably would have been like, whoa, fuck yeah, I'm gonna go listen to that. But I think I always assumed death metal was, you know, like, very chuggy and kind of like thrash metal and had weird, noodly technical leads, and... This is all of those things.
Yeah, I was about to say that's a good description of this. So
it's a very satisfying blend, I think.
Yeah, no, I think they do it very well. So just as a little bit of background info, so Sickening Horror did their first record back in 2007. It was called When Landscapes Bled Backwards. Amazing title. And
that's a cool title.
Very good album. And it was kind of a minor hit at the time because it was in an era of pretty much exclusively very like noodly tech death. It did a much more abstract, impressionistic take on it, much more in the vein of gore guts and stuff like that, rather than the noodly stuff at the time. Now, fast forward 13 years later, a big wing of tech death sounds like that abstract mid-pace stuff. Look at Ulcerate and all those kind of following bands. So now Sickening Horror apparently...
Also mid-paced as in sort of the way that the tempo at which the melodies move, right? Because also blasts really fast. Right?
They blast, but the melodies kind of hang there. It's not...
I get that. Yeah. I get that.
So now what we've got is, now that that's the cool thing, Sickening Horror's gone back to the very unfashionable thing, which is a sort of riff on mid-2000s tech death. Much more conventional style of tech death for that era that you don't really hear now. It's got a lot of touches of late death, but I think executed much better than any of that stuff. It's got touches of Skeptic and other kind of uncool European tech death bands, but I like this record a lot, and I think a lot of it has to do with that being a style that you just don't hear anymore.
On the notes, you've also got Sadus.
Yeah, I think Sadus is another influence, especially with how bass forward this record is, and that combined with the thrashiness gives me a sense of maybe like Chemical Exposure or something like that, which is one of the few thrash bands that I do enjoy. So real quick, let's just open up with a sample to give people a sense of what's going on. So first one is going to be off the second track on this record. It's called Fragments of Time. So let's just give that a try, and we'll talk about what we hear.
Fragments of time, fragments of dreaming, fragments of you. Waiting for the day, I was waiting for the rest of the year. Waiting for the day, I was waiting to turn and fall.
Yeah, all right. That's some death metal.
That is what you... I guess I understand what you're saying, what people imagine when they hear death metal. This is what I imagine when I hear tech death, just because of what I grew up hearing associated with that. But there, I really like, there's a lot of interesting playful ideas on this, like that opening kind of bouncy riff over the tom part. Mm-hmm. That's like a riff that would be a very conventional melodeath riff, but they tweak the second half of it like a semitone down, so it's not latching onto that major scale that you would typically hear in At the Gates or something.
Yeah, that's a good example of sort of a way to write a melody, a driving melodic death metal riff that isn't consonant.
Yeah,
right?
And then, like you were saying,
weird and angular.
Yeah, like you were saying earlier, this is also very reminiscent of, I wouldn't even say early, I'd say Psychroptic is pretty consistent. This sounds like most of their output, especially with the really big emphasis on super precise rhythm guitar. There's not a lot of tremolo riffs, there's a lot of kind of palm muted, very tight tremolo riffing, but that you always want to hear the attack on the strings in these riffs with that sort of like less overdriven, kind of more crunch oriented guitar tone.
Yeah, because the guitar tone is very clean, and so the sort of the intensity comes from the picking.
Yeah, exactly.
And the palm mutes. Yeah, I was struck by when I heard Psychroptic, which was not that long ago for the first time. I was struck by how thrashy it was, and same with this.
This is a very thrashy record. Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of. We've talked about I think on this podcast before and just IRL about the notion of is thrash obsolete? What happened to thrash? And I think we basically agree that on the whole, thrash, especially like big four bands aside from Slayer and stuff like that sounds like that, was a sort of awkward intermediate genre that was almost dead in the water when it started.
Yeah. I kind of like the idea of, I don't know. Remember a bunch of episodes ago you were talking about, is grindcore a genre or is it music that grinds? Is thrash metal a genre or is it music that thrashes? You know what I mean?
Right, and then thrash metal, properly speaking, is the use of a thrash technique to write bad heavy metal songs.
Yeah, basically. So I would say there's probably a ton of places where I know there's a ton of places where thrash technique is used in a very good way. I just don't know if it sustains whole albums.
Oh, I mean, you can pick like whole parts of a Metallica album or song that are great, and then the other parts suck ass, right?
Yeah.
It's so I mean, I think we both agree that there are kinds of thrash we like. So for me, the question is, where does thrash go? Is there a kind of thrash-oriented music that doesn't turn into death metal or black metal, per se, but sort of makes it to extreme metal. And, we've talked about we have both like the more aggressive 80s thrash bands. I really like Creator. You like, Demolition Hammer and shit, right?
Yeah, and Sodom and stuff.
Yeah, sure. Sodom's cool. Yeah. So, dumb, extremely aggressive, clattering thrash. But, my hypothesis is that, like, one place thrash becomes extreme metal is in that kind of, the more melodic sort of strutting war metal stuff. Mm-hmm. Some of which is Australian. But, like, some which you don't like. But, like, Gospel of the Horns is a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah, or, like, from the U.S., House of Atreus now. You can listen to that, and it's just not really death metal, and it's not really black metal. It's something like extremely heavy, flamboyant thrash. On the other hand, what might happen to thrash is it becomes tech death. This almost, to me, sounds like it's built from thrash parts more than to... like what I now know to be recognizably death metal parts.
I would argue, I think there's a real argument to be made that for the most part, the riffs in this they're not death metal riffs. They are much closer to the sort of like proggy edges of thrash and early death thrash. There's a lot of, like Atheist on this record, you'll hear a lot of, but there's not, you're never going to hear an incantation riff on this record. So.
Yeah, you're never just going to get like a buzzsaw trem or like D-beats or, so for me, one interesting thing is that this is a very melodic album. Mm-hmm. And it thrashes a lot. And they are Greek, right?
Yeah.
And so something I hear a lot in this is maybe just because I'm the black metal guy or whatever, but to me this reminds me of Rotting Christ in places. Yeah. And does that make sense to you? Let's go to
let's give it a listen.
End of Chaos Revamped. Yeah.
All right, let's give that a try.
Wasting a curse, its face no free, and with my suffering makes blood. And with my suffering makes blood.
Yeah, so that sounds kind of non-Surrey-y, right? Or as I mighty contracty.
To a degree, I would associate it less with Rotting Christ specifically and more with Greek metal in general, which has always been a little bit more willing to lean into sort of like trad metal, even in odd spots like that.
The early Septic Death, too, almost, although they're a death metal band, almost sounds like Rotting Christ. And so I hear what you mean, that there's sort of a Greek metal thing.
Yeah. And I think you do hear that in fits and starts on this record. But I think they're almost
using, it's like, as you were saying, using the sort of like fast 8th and 16th note chug as like the tremolo riffing thing. So the whole riff is constructed out of chug. That to me is very Greek.
It's very Greek, and it's also very thrash. Especially the tech thrash bands like Sadist would do that a lot.
Yeah.
So I think what's interesting is that typically a band, playing with parts like that more dramatic non-Servian part would use that as a climactic moment for a song. But here on this record, it's more used as like punctuation. It's more kind of used in the place of a breakdown, as you would hear it on like a hardcore influence record.
Yes, that's how I heard it too.
Yeah, it's not, because one thing we mentioned was that this whole style of tech death from the 2000s, and this record in particular, has an atmosphere of not having atmosphere.
Yes.
It is, which it sounds retarded, but we've got a logic to it. It is music kind of stripped of feeling, of artistry.
Yeah, that's its kind of inhumanity. Right?
Yeah,
it's just... You almost, although it's flashy, you almost don't even hear the musicianship when it's done right.
It's very demonstrative. It's more like a clinic of kind of technical ideas rather than songs as you think of it.
I was saying about Psychroptic, it's like there's no sort of emergent property to the music. There's nothing that comes out of the riffs as their sort of like unified sort of surplus or whatever. It's just, there's no extrinsic atmosphere. Each of the riffs, of course, has a little bit of a feel built in, but it was just like, here, I present to you my riffs.
Yeah,
Gaze upon their sickness.
And it's interesting because you can level
it's pure.
You can level exactly that same accusation at 100,000 YouTube shred guitarists, but they piss me off, and this doesn't.
And it has to do with the focus on writing riffs. People say that about Psychroptic, too. He doesn't play leads. He just writes sick fucking detailed rhythm guitar riffs, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, because you got to remember, Psychroptic is a one-guitar band. And that's how they play. I've seen them live, and that's how they do it. There's no backing tracks or anything, man. You just go for it.
Yeah. And the proof is sort of in the pudding. It's like, if you don't, you can say that it's soulless or whatever, but it's
I think that's kind of the point, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, well, bro, do you like riffs or no?
I mean, I think it is, at a certain point, it is like meditative music to smoke weed to, in the same way that plenty of good Doom records are, and I don't really begrudge them for that, so I'm not going to begrudge this for being this way.
No, sure. All right, so speaking of smoking weed, you've got a track called Cubicle Void.
Yeah, there's some really fucking... I love how, like, classically dorky the song titles are here. So anyway, Cubicle Void, this is one of the more interesting parts, because this is one of the few parts that actually does have a feel, so let's listen to the opening of this sample.
Yeah, that's a cool riff, man.
Yeah, no, it's fucking sick, man. Oh boy. No, I really like that because they keep using that lead guitar line as a motif. It recurs a few times in the song, and it kind of reminds me of sort of a traditional prog rock style.
Yeah, it reminds me of King Crimson.
Yeah, it reminds me of King Crimson. The note that I put down is it reminds me of Separations, The Cube, which is a really, really fucking cool, forgotten French death metal record. Kind of a prog death record, which doesn't sound like anything before or since. Imagine
it sounds like a cube.
Imagine Separations, The Cube sounds like a progressive death metal band creating the soundtrack to an early 90s sci-fi PC game, which means that it's fucking sick. Like, it has a really weird, bad 3D graphics for its cover and everything. Like, it's great. So, but there's a kind of a similar guitar effect going on here. But what
I like that. That's like a sort of, is it just a lot of delay and something else, right? It's got to be something else.
It's a ton of delay and there's something else because I'm sure it's like probably a unique lead tone that they programmed just for this song. But I kind of like the idea that a lot of this is written in a kind of traditional prog way where songs are almost like a jazz tradition structured around a single riff idea. And then
it gets developed in a way that's different from how a black metal band develops a single riff.
Well, it's more about like vamping off to the sides of it, improving a little bit, showing off, having your solos, and then going back to that as the main theme. Like an elaboration on traditional rock or pop songwriting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's the head. Let's and then you play off that. I get that. Yeah, definitely reminds me of video game music too.
Which is always cool.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good video game music. And the glassy tone is sick. The bounciness of the riffs. One thing about music like this, I think, that's a sign of its quality is that it can make even me stoked about the future.
I like that.
You know, it's the joke. The joke is he's the death metal guy, I'm the black metal guy, and you know, my head is 4 millennia in the past.
Yeah.
So it's you know, when you hear something like this, you're like, oh shit, maybe the future's gonna be cool. It's
I think the best kinds of this sort of prog death thing are sort of sci-fi inspired and kind of futuristic. It ages badly, but when it works, it really works.
Yeah, I think it works, and it's weird that it's come back as a trend, and I don't know that the bands that are doing it in a trendy way they're almost not nerdy enough to do it right.
No, yeah, I don't think
neither of us are huge Blood Incantation fans.
No, but then there's actually a huge wing of brutal death and slam that's all kind of sci-fi themed.
I've seen that, and I like it better because I don't have to see
dismembered anime girls.
Yeah, exactly. Just a waste of a good anime girl, man. It's a different kind of weird cover, and I enjoy it. Okay, so last one for me is this is again just me being the person who doesn't know anything about this and throwing out a reference that I'll come back to in the next one. This is the beginning of Loophole. This is just a pretty cool wonky chug riff, and I like those.
All right, let's listen. If you like that, because I didn't even remember that part, then you've got to listen to that Separation record, because it is mostly weird chug patterns and glassy melodic leads hanging overhead. It's that's that Separation record. You're gonna love that.
Great.
Yeah.
You know what? Oh, this is another thing I wanted to bring in. This album gets a certain mood, which I call cool wizard music.
Yeah, you've mentioned that before, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that fall into that.
You were saying that with Seer Bliss, yeah.
Yes, Dead Can Dance is cool wizard music. Seer Bliss is cool wizard music. Some music by Coil or some of the neo-folk bands is cool wizard music. It has to, the last Akerkaka is cool wizard music. This also reminds me of that, in that it's very thrashy and also very sort of wonky and atmospheric. Yeah. The Akerkaka's more atmospheric, but cool wizard music is basically it has to have a certain kind of serenity to it. It has to be you are the cool wizard just reading your fucking grimoires or whatever, or just, hopping through portals and shit.
Yeah.
And this is your cool wizard existence. And so when I want to feel when I want to feel centered, get in my cool wizard zone, I put on shit like this.
Well, yeah, and that's worth mentioning, is that this really isn't aggressive music in any traditional way. I think that's one of the big things one of the things I disliked about it originally, when this style was big in its era, is the fact that, one of the big things is it's death metal in theory without aggression. There is no violence to it.
Yeah, and a band that plays like this, that's just battering on a really tinny triggered drum set, is going to sound just like failure, right?
Yeah, no, it's but even then, it's I'll have to go back to some of those 05 albums and really kind of compare and contrast. But I think this does it better than a lot of the stuff back then did. I think it's a little more honest about, back then there was they would throw in a really aggressive blast part with some guttural vocals and shit to make you remember that it's a death metal record.
The guy's just tapping the snare drum.
Yeah, exactly.
He's
but
using triggers.
And this is more hey, we're basically doing a fairly straightforward prog rock album with a death metal aesthetic. We hope you like it.
Yeah, and it also just cuts it as a metal album.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just a fucking metal album. You know, it's like, yeah, smoke weed in the parking lot.
I mean,
cool.
there's a universal quality to this where I could probably play it around like a Pantera guy, and he would think it's pretty cool.
That's what I mean. It's like the person who doesn't really listen to death metal but has heard things like death metal gets what this is.
Yeah.
The other thing about the end of that song is so poppy. The end of that sample.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of kind of like pop and rock melodies tucked in. It's sort of
very fruity and extremely simple. And if the album were full of that, or
it would be too much. Yeah.
It would suck. Yeah. But right there, it's just like, great, you've earned this. You're like 11 tracks in or whatever. That's kind of cool. Right? And it shows that they've been paying attention. They haven't been under a rock. I mean, to me, that sort of like glistening lead thing reminds me of these kinds of like, let's say, post-black metal bands that don't have a complex about it.
Yeah.
So like the Les Acteurs de l'Ombre bands out of France who are just like, have a kind of extreme black metal intensity, but are also very post and have a lot of sort of screamo and atmospheric kind of things going on. That kind of glistening lead reminds me of that. And it's nice. And then that super poppy chug again is just cool. It's like riding Christ.
Yeah. You know, I guess like, it's like we were saying before we got on, it's like, we'll probably never listen to this album again, but that doesn't mean it's bad.
No, it's just because of the kinds of things we normally listen to. And, you know, honestly, if I want some cool wizard music, maybe I will.
I would definitely show this to friends of mine who are into more technical music generally. I mean, like, you know, I've got a lot of buddies that are into a lot of kind of progressive death metal and tech death stuff, but they're like kind of our age, so a lot of the shit nowadays just doesn't appeal to them. It's just too flashy.
At a sufficiently autistic party, it'd be good party music.
Yeah, I kind of would.
Yeah. All right.
We'll
so go break and come back.
Yeah, let's do that.
Oh, wait. Let me do my annoying plug.
Yeah, let's do a plug.
So, if you're new to the show, welcome. We've been doing this for 8 episodes now, and we intend to keep doing it until, the bombs fall. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts. You can get us on Podbay or any of the other main podcast aggregators like Podcast Addict. A thing that would be, if you follow us on our hosting site, Podbean, I guess you have to probably make an account to like us, so fuck that. But follow us on YouTube and you can subscribe if you're listening to this on YouTube. And you enjoyed it, please throw us a like, because,
smash that motherfucking like button.
Yeah.
At 100 likes, we're going to do a Fortnite V-Bucks giveaway.
Yeah. Dude, smash that like button at 1,000 BPM.
Smash it for Thule, smash it for Odin, smash it for Satan. Whatever.
Smash for Odin!
That's some shit that you would say. Don't talk shit.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back with some more music.
Peace.
All right, so next up, we've got Supercontinent, the first full length by Thecodontion. How did you find these guys? Just through iVoidhanger? Or?
Just on Bandcamp. I just saw it, and I saw, a Thecodont, which I believe is a giant ground sloth. Googling it now.
Apparently it's from a...
oh, fuck, I'm wrong.
It's a taxonomy.
Shit, well, it's not a giant ground sloth. We're skipping this band. It's a fossil quadrupedal or partly bipedal reptile of the Triassic period, so a very early dinosaur, having teeth fixed in sockets in the jaw. Let's see him. He's just some weird-ass proto-reptile dude. So I was totally wrong about that, but I saw the name, and I was like, well, that's weird enough to click. And when you see the name like that, like a prehistoric name, you think, it'll give you flashbacks to early 2000s Fun Sludge.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit, right? But I'm like, but the name is cool enough and weird enough that I want to check. And I see the logo, which is this weird smeary thing, which reminds me of Antediluvian. And I see the first comment on Bandcamp by someone named American and Antichrist. I haven't been this excited for a band since Antediluvian. Hell yeah. And so I thought, well, Antediluvian is a great band, so I will click on this weird album. Gosh, these guys are from Italy, and they're a Black Death. Formally, the general paradigm is from war metal, like the more avant-garde, weird war metal, like Antediluvian or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a bassist and a drummer. They probably play the basic tracks live together, and then the bassist does a lot of looping shit, where he plays, high strings and uses lots of distortion.
Yeah, that was something I was curious about, is because a lot of times on this record there are leads that sound like guitar leads. I'm wondering if he's like kicking up his bass with an octave pedal to give it like a guitar sound, something like that.
Probably doing something like that. I mean, I was talking with you about this before, but to me the band it really reminds me of is, or the joke concept for it is just like war metal lightning bolt.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you haven't heard Lightning Bolt, anybody our age would have heard Lightning Bolt. I think that's one of those.
I mean, at this point, I think it's like, you've heard that, or you've heard the cleaned up version in Death from Above. So.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that band is completely unknown now.
Really?
I saw they were a flash in the pan, yeah.
Dude, I really liked that first record, though.
I love that record. That was when Vice magazine was cool, or still sort of cool. That's when it was like sleazebag.
So let's real quick. Let's just give like a sample so people can.
We'll give you a sample, and then I'll keep talking about Lightning Bolt.
Okay.
All right.
So what we got first? I think we got yours first. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go for it. So this one is there's just a very weird sense of melody on this album that I think is one of its distinguishing qualities, and you'll hear it here.
I'm guessing that timestamp is supposed to be to 1:14.
That would be my guess. Let's just play it from there.
All right, sure.
We should have let it roll a little longer to get the blasting in there, but whatever.
There will be more blasting later on. So
yeah. So that's got this. You can hear there the bass either shifted up, maybe pitch shifted up, and using this strange effect to generate a tone you couldn't get on a guitar. And it has these kind of weebly-woobly ecstatic major key melodies, which is signature Lightning Bolt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like Lightning Bolt is, if you're too young, Lightning Bolt was a weird noise rock band from Providence. They sounded like they were on shit tons of drugs, but I believe they were straight edge vegan. And they just sort of like fast, happy, psychedelic grindcore. And it was like the idea of like music you just like, you'd like take a bong rip and then finish a 40 and get really stoked listening to Lightning Bolt. That's my memory.
It's sort of like a really extreme dance music in a way.
Yeah, it's ecstatic. They used to have these wild shows. But yeah, so it's got this Lightning Bolt thing. It's what it is relative to extreme metal. It's an adventurous sense of melody, right?
Yeah, I mean, relative to extreme metal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a simple melody. I mean, I think you're getting more and more sort of major key ideas introduced into metal one way or another.
Yeah.
So it's, pardon me, beer burp. So I suppose it's part of that trend, but it's certainly unusual, and the way of just sitting on that and embracing the echo, not doing anything with the drums, just here it is, here's the theme. It's an interesting and distinctive idea, and it sort of gives this album a mood, right? It's just the lyrics are all just like
basically just out of textbooks.
Yeah, like telling stories about prehistoric, sort of like
continental drift
geology.
and stuff. Yeah.
Kinorland, located at lower latitudes until tectonic magma plume rifting the Baltic Shield over the equator, joined to the Canadian, forming a unity. Its nexus near the Fennoscandian Shield. Transition point to two-layer core. Findings of earlier continents indicate contradicting adjustment theories. It's stuff like that. And so you kind of get like, okay, this isn't really angry metal, and it's not really sort of dark. It's kind of in the same, with our theme of inhumanity, it's kind of just literally not about people. And the mood it has is difficult to place as anything human. If anything, you've kind of got this like upbeat kind of like, damn, aren't rocks cool kind of feel.
It's kind of channeling, it's attempting to channel a sort of like primordial life force.
Yes.
Yes. Like the generation of worlds and stuff, which is, not too far from something like the first Skepticism record or something, this like kind of thunderous emergence of something from nothing.
I like that. Yeah. Thunderous emergence is good. Yeah, for sure. Thunderous and the sort of trying to capture the sort of the multiplicity of life, right? And they're like not keep going.
Oh no, I was about to break off to my sample just because I think my first sample is very similar to yours and like what I think is cool, and then we can kind of break into our overall feelings about the record from there.
Cool.
I think.
Let's go.
Sure. So this is off
So that was like a more developed version of the thing I sampled.
Yeah, and I think we can probably both agree that those sorts of passages are the most interesting things on the record.
Yeah, it's weird. I would say that this album, this is a truly experimental album in the best sense of the word, in that it's really taking risks. And it's sort of like, I would describe this as kind of R&D for their own future work and for other people's future work.
Yeah. It's clearly they're going to take ideas that they discover off this one and apply it to other bands that are a little more normative.
Yeah, and maybe further records from this band will gel a little more. But basically, there's this epic major key kind of stuff. Strange, you've got winding leads and tribal drumming in the notes. Those are the most moments where there's the most sort of like sense that you could listen to it as music.
Yeah.
Those are the most sort of like engaging metal-esque moments.
That's...
although you also said not really metal.
I don't think of that as really a metal passage, and the my overall theme for this record, I guess I could sum up as, I really appreciate a metal band being this experimental and going out there and toying with so many creative ideas within a pretty unified aesthetic, but I don't like how they kind of suck at being a metal band.
Suck is a little harsh. It's, I don't know, they don't seem that interested in it. That's the weird thing. With the blasting parts, right? Again, the way they're chording it is really interesting. It's like, you get note choices that aren't exactly dissonant, aren't exactly melodic. They have some of that major key in them, but they change very jarringly. There's some interesting sensibility going on in how he's using the bass chords during the blasting, but it just has this kind of clattering... You have to listen really carefully to hear what he's doing, and that sort of defeats the purpose of clattering, aggressive, eighth note blasting. right?
Well, yeah, and so this is where we'll have to get in the weeds a little bit. So the idea of doing an extreme metal band that is just that has no guitars, that's just bass and drums and voice, isn't new. There's a lineage of bands doing that. You've got Neanderthals are a very well-known example. They're a brutal death band from Estonia who do it. There's a band called Gord from Germany who do kind of a groovy gore grind thing, who are very good. There's Bunker, a funeral doom drone band that does it. Obviously, that makes intrinsic sense there. And there's a bunch of others. But the whole thing...
I mean, weren't some lineups of Ride for Revenge had no guitars?
Yeah, early Ride for Revenge had no guitars.
When they did Morning Won't Bring a Twinkling Star, that's no guitars.
The first 3 or 4 Ride for Revenge records.
Under the Eye has guitars. Yeah.
And then, of course, there's, like, Necromantia, although they were using, like, an 8-string bass, which has guitar octets, so does it really count? Whatever. But the thing is, when you're going bass only for extreme metal, you've got a bunch of issues inherent to it that you're going to have to figure out a workaround for. Like, Neanderthals is probably the most aggressive in that they really don't find a workaround. They're just so aggressive and bizarre that the avant-garde aspect kind of overwhelms it. If you listen to a band like Necromantia, obviously they're kind of cheating it and making the bass sound more like guitar. You listen to Gord, again, they're kind of playing with distortion and giving it a little bit more of that mid-range body that it needs to be the only stringed instrument. They're trying to do that on this record with some of the lead stuff, but the reality is they haven't touched up anything that's going on in, like, the blasting sections, the more metallic sections. So as a result, they just come across as kind of noisy and drony, but not in, like, the sort of spastic, nightmarish way that a band like Neanderthals would.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, my note on this is blast riffs are highly original, you don't totally work. I think for me what this band is doing that's commendable is precisely not doing the workarounds. They want to figure out some way to do it totally without the guitar thing, and the idea is, this is something we've talked about specifically with black metal, but I think you can think of it in general in relation to extreme metal technique, is how do you stay in some way rooted to the fundamentals and ideals of these genres and subgenres while pushing them in new places and maybe in places that are beyond metal, right? Yeah. So that to me is a commendable object, and what they're trying to do with the bass you could call medium specificity. The idea that just, like, if you're a painter, you want to work mostly with color, right? This is the modern artist, sort of like Picasso and people in the wake of Picasso took it way too far. But certain ideas, right? Like, if you're a musician, you should be trying to play music, not narrate stories. If you're a painter, you should be dealing with color and space, but not trying to make something that looks like a photograph, right? Yeah. Do what you're doing. So they're trying to do that with bass. But it's difficult. And maybe there's still too much reaching in a guitar direction.
To a degree. I mean, I've got...
You know what I mean?
I've got a sense of my ideal for this band and where they could go. And we'll get to that, towards the end of this section. But, yeah, I mean, I get what you mean. Like, when you start doing the lead stuff, it's like... Oh, you're kind of working around that limitation, aren't you? You know what I mean? It's
exactly, yeah. So it's like there's a bewilderment of ideas here, I think. And there's the willingness to do something very new. It doesn't come off as hipster or poser, I would say.
No, it doesn't.
It's just eccentric, weirdo metal. And it's not novel. They're not going for novelty, but there's just some working out that has to happen. So do we want to do your sample or my sample?
I guess I'll just do mine, and then I'll talk about
I think yours is the most relevant.
Yeah, I'll do what I envision for the band here. So this is the opening of Nuna.
thought while I was listening to that, which is it's not so much that they're using these weird in-between intervals in the blasting. It's really just that it's so chromatic that they're trying to play outside of any sense of the human ear.
Yeah,
certainly any sense of encultured ideas about scales, and I'm pretty sure that goes for anywhere in, the East or Africa too, right? This is just going to be alien to anyone's ear.
Well, this could also, I think there's, it's plausible that a lot of this is improvised and like the leads are dubbed over.
Yeah.
I think that's a possibility, but so there's interesting kind of melodic ideas occurring there, but ultimately I feel like a band like, I keep harping on it, but Neanderthals has done the metal sides of this record better, and just a lot of this becomes kind of interminable over the course of the full album. Like, the blasting stuff is just... Because Neanderthals chops it up. They've got lots of bizarre rhythmic ideas in there. The vocals are better. I really don't get the purpose of the vocals on this record, really, as a whole. Like, I don't think it really makes sense. The vocals
are very aggressive and barking, right?
Which doesn't fit the idea of this music.
Yeah, what if you had like a singer in this band? Or just someone doing weird shamanic yelling?
Yeah, that would make more sense.
Weird shamanic yelling is the way to go, I think.
Well, honestly, the way I envision this band is like... We've seen they can do cool stuff with these sort of like winding, simple lead ideas and the sort of like tribalistic drumming. So why don't they basically just go in a highly consonant drone doom direction? Like, just do these slow, churning Paleolithic songs, leave them instrumental where the guiding voice is just those lead guitars kind of shimmering out in the ether, while the bass provides just that, like, geological crunch under it. I think that makes more sense to me with the ingredients that they have here.
Yeah, I couldn't say where exactly I imagine it going. It's, I don't mind there being... In some sense, I don't like instrumental metal bands very much, for the most part. Just because I feel like the vocals add something to the aggression.
What I'm imagining is basically not a metal band anyway, so...
Yeah, I think certainly the slow parts are the most convincing on this, whether they're melodic or not. The last thing I want to bring in is just calling back something that I brought up with the Sickening Horror, is... the idea of the killing joke. For those of you who might be more embedded in extreme metal, perhaps you haven't come across them.
You should. You should listen to them. You should.
The killing joke is one of the most influential, least talked about, more than they used to be, thanks to the internet, but one of the most seminal bands of the 80s. They were sort of, or even late 70s, they were... called post-punk, but that doesn't really do justice to what they were doing. They were at the roots of so many things. They were sort of contemporaneous with Joy Division, and they were doing this dark, sort of throbbing dub and funk bass-driven stuff that doesn't sound remotely like dub or funk, with sort of this cold... sometimes minor key, sometimes weirdly major, increasingly later just skronky and atonal, kind of glistening lead guitar that you hear now versions of in tech death things, or or in DSO. Any kind of like fried sounding arpeggios, kind of killing jokey. Certain syncopated tribal beats. Metallica rips off a couple of the early Killing Joke songs. They name them as an influence. Amoebix is Killing Joke worship more than anything. And their frontman was a dude who, probably the first person to do serious corpse paint. Not like Kiss.
And in terms of vocal style, I imagine a giant influence to Attila for Mayhem.
Yeah, probably, yeah. He's a great charismatic vocalist. He has this primordial bellow. And also does a lot of other weird shit. And they were all into occult shit. There's some great story about... Because this is a podcast, I might as well tell the Killing Joke story that I remember. It's my lore. It's, when they recorded their third album, Revelations, I believe. Killing Joke, Revelations. Yeah, that was their last album with the original lineup. And one of them, at that time, I can't remember which band member, possibly the guitarist, mixed the album on LSD, and he spent like several days mixing it, during most of which he was hiding under the mixing table. And when he came out, he didn't know where the other band members had gone. And they'd all gone to Iceland because they heard it was required for the fulfillment of an apocalyptic prophecy. Sort of ended the original lineup of the band. But yeah, what a cool band. It's like genuinely difficult music to listen to, but it's extremely rewarding.
Yeah, no, I really like them.
Yeah. Revelations is probably where the sound most comes together. And if you're into sort of cold, glassy guitar tones and weird driven riffs and stuff that sounds tribal and Dionysiac, you will like it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's play the Killing Jokes. The thing that sounds a little bit Killing Jokey. This reminds me of songs like their slower, dubbier songs like Requiem or Tomorrow's World.
Okay, so this is off Larova.
Yeah, Larova.
Let's try that out.
So that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it's cool. So you agree with me, they're better as not a metal band.
I think I probably do. The question is, how can you do some of it? Yeah, you could just be a really heavy avant post-punk band, right? Or whatever. Post-punk is a dumb name. Yeah. There's definitely all sorts of good shit in that, and it doesn't sound like quote-unquote post-punk, which is mostly fucking indie rock, right?
Yeah.
Or indie rock appropriations of forms from the early 80s.
Gothic cultural appropriation.
Yes, cultural appropriating goth.
Oh, shit.
And a lot of, weirdly also with post-punk, it's a lot of bands were making that music before punk as the Sex Pistols or 77 punk happened. Like, the Stooges' Funhouse is extremely heavy and aggressive. Was the most heavy and aggressive thing written until Discharges Y. And sounds like post-punk, not punk rock.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of like... So even the Turi were things like Para Ubu or whatever. Like, the guys were in Para Ubu before they were in the Dead Boys. So it's kind of a strange word, and it annoys me. Anyway, so let's, we've got one more, and this is Autism Hour draws near.
Oh yeah, Autism Hour draws near, so we'll take a quick break, and, we're gonna go hard on this next one.
Alright.
Alright, so, next up, we have Fluids with Ignorance Exalted, and, you hadn't heard these guys before, I don't think?
I had not. I'd seen the name a lot on Bandcamp. You have spoken of them in glowing terms for weeks. I'm not even sure I knew it was on Maggot Stomp. Maggot Stomp has had a lot going on for it the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, they seem to be becoming kind of like a cool guy death metal label. Death metal and grind.
Definitely some hardcore inflections in the packaging and in some of the music. They've done really well, and I think like some of these bands I know, because you're an old school guy and a contrarian, I know that some of the bands associated with you found kind of overrated, but a band I really like from there is Frozen Soul.
Frozen Soul.
Yeah, Frozen Soul is really good. It's ice-themed death metal. It doesn't really sound like black metal, and if you look at the band, it's ice-themed death metal that is not in any direct way blackened.
Oh man, you're reminding me of. You remember a brief meme band that was actually pretty good called Ice Imperial Crystalline Entombment.
That's the name of the band?
Yeah. Ice.
That's sick.
Yeah, they were like an Immortal worship band. They only did like 1 or 2 records.
Yeah,
but,
this doesn't sound like Immortal. It's like OSDM that's just cold.
Yeah.
And yeah, they have a sick band photo. It looks like they could have been a death metal band in 2004.
Yeah.
It's
yes. So Fluids is we got a lot to talk about here. So in short, Fluids is a band that uses Mortician as a base to build from. I think a lot of dumb people would say it's a Mortician clone. No, Fluid sees Mortician as a platform to, I would almost argue, develop into a new style of death metal, or a new sort of movement within it. Would you agree? I mean...
Yeah, I don't know. They're typed as brutal death metal, right? But...
Yeah, but that's not...
I would say this doesn't even... Not in a bad way, in a good way. This doesn't sound like a death metal record to me. In any recognizable way. Like, it's got extraordinarily gutturals, which I think are like guttural exhales.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vocals are just crushing and extremely death metal. And you'll hear death metal riffs in it and stuff. But overall, even the Mortician kind of sloppy death grind thing is less on this album, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not... it's there, but it's not an overwhelming part. And I would say, like, most of the slow guitar riffs are, in a sense, Mortician-derived. But even Mortician slow riffs are not actually death metal riffs, you know? I think we've talked about that before. It's like Mortician is like, on a guitar basis, really has very little to do with what we think of as death metal. It's got a lot more to do with early grindcore and Celtic Frost. And, just a lot
Winter.
of Winter, a lot of primordial shit like that. So just to give people a clue, let's go to like your first sample.
Yeah, so this is a good example of just real quick before you do that. It's also like, if you want to do something original, return to the primordial shit, because that's where the potential is. Yeah. That's where all these ideas and potentials are locked away. But let's go to sort of, here's a default part. Like if you're not familiar with Mortician or whatever, here's a part that's this kind of death grind blasting done well. All right.
And this is
from the end of Redacted.
All right. Yeah, so that's going to be kind of the closest you get to straight Mortician worship on this record.
Yeah, you can hear the sort of, right, it's program... Is this real or programmed drums?
These are programmed, yeah.
Yeah. It's, that's what I thought, but I'm just checking. So yeah, you can hear them. One thing that's good about medium specificity, right, is that like Mortician, this band takes advantage of the fact that the drums are programmed.
Yeah, specifically because you've got this very...
It's not like this is a substitute for real drums. It's like...
No, this is purposeful. It would not sound as good with
You can
a
make
real
them
drum.
Go faster than person drum. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's something I've always been...
No, the inorganic... there's the inorganic quality of it is really important, and the ability to play faster than any human drummer possibly could... and as we'll hear later at some of my co-host samples, it allows them to push towards electronic music in a seamless way.
Yeah,
Right.
which is a very important part of this music. This is a short album. It's only about 27 minutes long, but the number of ideas and kind of just musical concepts that are flirting with things from all over the map is really impressive.
And yet brought in together in a way that's really impressively integrated.
It's very consonant logically, you know?
It's related to a ton of things, but it is just one thing.
Yeah.
Which we kind of got in the Oppressive Descent too, but Oppressive Descent was still working within this general sense of a kind of black metal tradition, whereas this band is really pushing the envelope.
Yeah, they definitely are. And
they're trying to make the new wave of extreme music.
Yeah, and one thing that I'd like to say is, like, because we've been talking about this, we've talked about this on the show before, but it's fascinating how Mortician as a band really has been critically rehabilitated in the metal scene, to the point where I would say that now it used to be that if you liked Mortician, you were a dumb guy. Now it's almost the opposite.
They were like mocked. Right?
Yeah, now it's almost the opposite, where if you don't like Mortician, and if you don't see them as sort of art music, now you're kind of the idiot, which is a fascinating change that occurred just in the time that I've been into metal. Because I've been listening to Mortician since I was like 14 years old.
Yeah, must be, you must feel quite smug about this.
Well, I feel very fucking smug about it. But
in the way I feel, I was like listening to a bunch of Swedish Black Death that was seen as extremely uncool in the early 2000s, and I was like, people need to start making this again, and lo and behold, right?
Well, what's extra fascinating is that people are like, fucking Mortician, whatever, just like, Mortician's just like stupid, like, caveman death metal, except nobody actually sounded like Mortician. There were a couple clone bands that came many, many years later. But the reality is Mortician had no comparable bands around them in their heyday.
The tagline for Maggot Stomp is caveman shit.
Yeah, which is true. But they get that there is a nuance to the caveman shit, which is, I think that's the bigger change.
Some of the other bands on the label are basically like death metal doing hardcore, right? It's just sort of like goes for the throat, 3-riff bashing songs, which is cool.
And there's some
hardcore, I like death metal.
No, very much so. There's a lot of kind of punk influenced stuff. There's, a lot of brutal shit. There's some doom death. But I guess this is all part of not just a rehabilitation of Mortician, but a rehabilitation of dumb guy, so to speak, metal. Because,
guy metal is the real metal.
You can remember in, like, the late 2000s, early 2010s, how fucking smug and just fucking up its own ass the metal scene had become.
Death Spell Omega Hegemony.
Yeah.
Which was not really DSO guys' fault, but it was the fault of music critics and fucking drips.
It was like the metal scene had been seized by that guy I talked about a few episodes ago. It was like, metal has a lot to do with classical music. That guy took control of heavy metal. And only now...
that guy's not a hipster, but on the other side there were the hipsters, and they agreed about certain kinds of fancy stuff, right?
Well, it's like some people wanted death metal to be classical music, and other people wanted metal to be indie rock.
Yeah,
and then there wasn't anyone who just wanted it to be its own thing. And now we're starting to wrestle control back from those types of people. And thank God.
So you know what? And what's cool about this is very much within metal, within hardcore, within extreme music. It is viscerally enjoyable for anyone who likes these things. And yet they're doing something original, and it's far more original than all the fucking confectionery novelty music that was coming out in the early 2010.
Absolutely,
right?
I think this is a more artistic record than any fucking Seasons of Mist record has been for the past decade. You know?
Or longer, right? I mean,
probably.
But anyway, so. One thing I like about with the band that's doing something new and kind of avant-garde, you want to know, do they have their sort of nuts and bolts down? Are they also fulfilling, or more than fulfilling, the sort of the minimum requirement, the basic requirements for the style? And the answer, of course, is yes. So let's start with the beginning of the. Let's start with sort of near the beginning of the song, "Chunked," and you will hear some sick fucking beatdowns.
All right, let's do "Chunked."
Yeah. That's so fucking sick.
Well, the sickest part is at the very end of that sample where the drums just drop out. And all there is
just cymbals.
Just hanging in the void is that, like, too fast chug. Like, and what's interesting is, like, yes, that's definitely Mortician, but it's also, like, Author and Punisher, if you've ever listened to him.
I have not.
So Author and Punisher
it struck me as the kind of fancy arty music I wouldn't like. However, my horizons are much broader.
Oh no, Author and Punisher is fucking awesome. Like,
well, we have a lot of friends who like them too.
Yeah, no, they're. I mean, he does like cool music to listen to while drinking. It's arty, yeah, but it's also incredibly heavy and very catchy. So,
and he makes the instruments himself, right?
Yeah, he's a mechanical engineer, so he's just created all these kind of interesting ideas, kind of fusing physics with, sound creation and samplers and stuff. There's a couple videos of him talking about his setup and how he made everything that are really fascinating.
So what I liked about that sample is, like, they have, unlike a lot of contemporary down-tempo or beatdown stuff, which, for better or worse, a lot of that stuff relies on single-note breakdowns that depend on tone.
Yeah.
Tone and very precise things about rhythm, if you're doing it right. Mm-hmm. This is still in that Celtic Frost tradition in that it has, or the early hardcore tradition, in that it has melody built into it. Not in the sense of, like, catchy, shreddy Melodeath melody, but in the sense that there are meaningful chord forms in it. And those come to the fore. They're easier to hear at the end when the drums drop out.
Yeah.
And there's something I like in the guitar technique. It's very physical guitar playing. It's
definitely, it's played with the forearm, not with the wrist.
Yes, and there are sort of, at the end of a lot of these riffs, you hear it most clearly at the end, but it's happening throughout. At first, when that riff opens up a bit to the right, it's this kind of like down pick slide. And it produces this almost like, again, dubstep-like effect. And the opposite of that is at the end, when he does the up pick slide. And Winter does that all the time. Like, so the end of Into Darkness is one of just the heaviest. I just wish the whole album was like that. At the end is just like... It's massive.
Very bolt thrower.
It's as if you're cocking the guitar after each shot. Does that make sense?
You're pumping the shotgun.
You're recharging it. Yeah, exactly.
It's really cool. It's fascinating. They've got a complete mastery of this sort of Mortician technique, and this is where we get to my samples. So what you're talking about is essentially the foundation of this music. Of this just barbaric, but not primitive. I wouldn't even call this primitive. It's
it's futuristic.
It is kind of futuristic. There's something...
It's low IQ futurism.
It's definitely... Well, it's futuristic, but almost it's like that sort of like hyper-modernity. It's music about now. It's music about
that's right, for sure.
About like the current nightmare we're living in, which we'll get into momentarily. But let's get into the parts of this record that break out of what we think of as the traditional Mortician mold, and get to here's a sample off Quartered, and let me tell you guys, this isn't something that happens once on the record. This sort of thing recurs throughout. So let's give that a try.
Quartered is probably one of the best tracks.
Yeah, I think it might be. Yeah.
All right, let's go.
Tengo a tu gente. ¿Cómo la tengo? Mira cómo la tengo. ¿Todos quieren eso qué? ¿Se lo ubican o no? Eso es para que se pongan verga, hijos de su madre. No. ¡Ay! ¡Cállate, perro!
That's nice and distressing, isn't it?
Do you ever hear the gunshots or whatever?
I think at the end you do. So here's an important part, and this is going to come into play as we kind of talk about the themes of this record. Mortician uses horror movie samples. Fluids uses samples of cartel executions off Live Leak and like audio samples of court recordings and shit like that.
Yeah, the album starts with a corrupt NYPD cop just confessing,
enumerating his crimes.
Dude, maybe that was the guy who killed Epstein.
Probably.
There's this jacked dude they put in the cell next to him. It was like a corrupt cop who'd killed like 40 people.
Oh yeah, I do remember about that one. Yeah. But yeah, so I think it's really, I've said it before, but it's really important to stress that these are not intros. These are not an adjunct to the music. They are the music.
It's not like we both hate music that adds in extras that supposedly make it different. Right?
Yeah.
Things that are extrinsic to the music itself, like, oh, we're like a black metal record, but with like, post-rock elements or shoegaze elements, and then it's like, oh, great, here's the shitty tossed-off shoegaze album or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You could easily make a death metal or death grind album that has electronic elements where they're just grafted on superficially.
And it's been done many times before.
Yes, and where the person, like Full of Hell is like that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this guy is not a metal dude who learns the basic minimum about electronic music in order to add a cool part, or not a cool part, just make a gesture, a stylistic gesture.
Yeah.
This guy speaks this kind of programming as his native language. You can hear that.
Yeah, because what's interesting, if you just
I believe it's the drummer or the quote unquote drummer who also does the programming.
Well, it was. Yeah. The lineup of this is interesting, and I think it's very telling because, on Metal Archives, it says we've got a vocalist, we've got a guy who plays guitar and bass, and then we've got a guy who just does the programming and the synths and the recording.
In a way, it's. Well, go on.
No, I was just going to say, well, that's a very interesting way to perceive this stuff because they're saying that the kind of production side of it, the idea of the guy who's kind of grafting together these samples and these programmed beats and these electronic parts is a part of the music. He's not a guest. He is a main part of this sound.
Yes. And it's not anyone's side job. They don't like finish the songs and then add these parts.
Yeah, no, they're created in concert. I think a lot of this
it's almost like you've got three bands in one. Like, you've got these just heinous, brutal death metal vocals, right? Mm-hmm. You've got guitar and bass work that often sounds just as often like beatdown, right? As it does like death grind, right? So it's like almost like you got a death metal guy, you got some sort of grinding extreme hardcore thing, and then you've got avant electronic music guy, right?
Yeah. And one of the things that was really interesting about that passage was, like you were saying, you said something to the effect of, this is a guy speaking his native language in the electronic music. And that's very clear on this part, because what that reminds me of is the first couple records by Death Grips, who I'm sure you're probably familiar just through osmosis.
Oh yeah, I like Death Grips.
Yeah, I love the first 3 Death Grips records, and that sounds like something off Ex-Military or The Money Store.
One of the only things me and my girlfriend can agree on.
Yeah, but clearly it's like, oh, so it's not, because a lot of the time, you'll get a metal band with electronic influences, and it'll be like, it's what they remember of electronic music from their youth. It's not actually contemporary. It's not, it's not based off a real understanding of the style, but this is, which is what makes it so different and so exciting.
Yeah, and the electronic music here is not like, I don't know, it's not, other faults could be that the electronic music is obsolete, that it's not very cool, that it's whatever. Hang on, I'm going to sneeze.
I thought there was something going on there.
Yeah. There's also a cute dog barking outside. A Schuber. So what they're drawing on seems to me like there was a shit ton of really cool electronic music that started coming out in around 2010 and eventually almost distracted me from metal a little bit. Yeah. And I'm a little behind on it now. So my reference points are probably a little out of date, but like the music that comes out of basically UK dubstep, right?
Yeah.
Not the pop, the bright, shiny plastic crap like Skrillex, although Skrillex has a special place in my heart. But I just want him to be happy, more like the both the gritty original stuff, Code 9, Digital Mystics, stuff that I should know better, but it's very hard to listen to on an album basis because it's so singles oriented and mix oriented. Burial's the most famous example, and I think is relevant for this. Burial has this kind of, they were kind of hipstery to like, and so I poo-pooed it, and then I found him years later. I was like, damn, this is good. And it, has these sort of vast ghost in the shell like cityscapes, bleak postmodern cityscapes. And also, more avant stuff related to that. There's a band or a group called Function. I don't know if they sound like this anymore, but it's basically just like withering beatdowns with like electronic drill sounds. I think I played them for you years ago. Also, can we sample some of that?
I mean, I guess we could.
Let me see if I can. All right, yeah, so I was wrong about the name. It took me a minute to dig it out. Function is a track I remembered. The group is called Empty Set, and this is off of the album Demiurge. There also is a remixed version of one of these songs by their friend Rolly Porter, which is called A Vulgar Display of Power. So that's just some of their influences, but let's hear it.
All right, let's give that a shot.
Yeah.
I do love that band. I love them to death. It's always been interesting, the idea that they're kind of creating music without notes in a way that's similar to a lot of metal stuff that I love.
Oh, yeah. It's post-melody music that still has some of the things that make riffs.
Yeah.
There's tonal quality to the noise, the echo even, the...
Yeah.
There's this intense sort of substance to the sort of those bass thumps. It's like melody adjacent.
Yeah, it's like there's an after effect or a ghost of melody happening.
Yeah, and that's one of the places to push guitar-based music too, I think. And when stuff like this was coming out, you could also mention like really heavy sort of gothic German techno, Ancient Methods, also cold as fuck.
Yeah.
Just thunderous. He's still active, doing good stuff. This music was, to me, sort of scanned as a challenge to extreme metal. Because a lot of these guys obviously listened to extreme metal, to industrial music, post-industrial stuff, and they were infusing their music with that. At the time, which was, again, kind of the tail end of a very dark period for metal, right? 2010, 2012. There wasn't that much that could meet it on its own terms, except maybe Aosoth, who had this sort of rumbling kind of godflesh presence. And at least on Arrow and Heart 4. Or is it 3? Which is the one with the, whatever.
It's called Arrow and Heart. I don't know the numbering.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, they're all called that, though. Point is, there was a gauntlet thrown down, and one place to go for metal was to try to pick up that gauntlet. And I think Fluids have really done it more skillfully, honestly, than I could have imagined.
Mm-hmm.
It's, yeah, so what's your next sample?
So the last sample I've got, before we get into kind of the abstract stuff, is off the last track, Smothered. And this is really similar to something we were talking about on an earlier episode. So let's just listen to this sample real quick.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And obviously the comparison I'm going to make, if you're out there listening,
Yes.
you've heard our previous examples, or our previous episodes.
Yeah,
Is,
this would be episode 4. I think.
I think episode 4,
Yeah,
we
episode
talked
4.
about the latest Xibalba record that started to channel a lot of very traditional funeral doom and doom death ideas, and it's remarkably similar to what we're hearing
Yeah,
here.
these guys have to be Xibalba fans, right?
Oh, I
mean,
assume so.
it's
Well, plus these guys are also from, like, they're coming from Arizona, we've got that in SoCal. Maybe this is the start of some sort of kind of southwestern doom death idea.
Southwestern avant-core. Yeah.
I mean, there's also bands like Ruin, who are from...
you love Ruin, yeah.
Yeah, I love... And we're actually going to be talking about a Ruin record in probably a couple episodes from now. And Ruin are from, out in the middle of, desert Southern California. So it feels like there's something going on. Oh, and then the photo on Metal Archives, one of the guys in Fluids has a Ruin shirt on. So clearly there's kind of a crossover of ideas of this reestablishment of doom death or funeral doom.
That riff at the end, I mean, that comes towards the end of the album, or a final track.
Yeah,
really.
It's the last track.
It's a really good climactic thing because it's the first recognizably, indisputably metal moment on the album. Like capital M metal.
Yeah.
Right? It's this tremendous gothic riff, right? comes out of the middle of nowhere, and it's sort of erupting in the midst of this very urban soundscape.
Yeah,
right?
it's the only recognizably emotional part of the album. Yeah. It's the only thing with any sort of sentiment or any sort of humanity to it.
It's fucking, it's a lament. And that, again, reminds me of good anime soundtracks and anime shit. Like, I'm thinking a part, the part towards the end of the Ghost in... There are lots of good parts in Ghost in the Shell, but like the parts where the, just takes out, Pillow Doll.
Fucking weeb.
It's, I feel like Ghost in the Shell is kind of entry. I think I'm only entry level anime.
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
Ghost in the Shell.
But Ghost in the Shell is there are these beautiful moments where nothing is happening, right? Mm-hmm. No sort of action, no whatever. There's this awesome scene where she's looking out of a cafe window at a barge going down a canal, this just overcrowded canal.
Yeah.
There's this moment towards the end where she's fighting this robot thing and it just shoots up. It's heavy-handed, but in a good way. They're in the remains of some abandoned museum, and as the thing is firing at her, she runs up the wall and it blows away the remains of the evolutionary tree on the wall.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it reminds me of that. It's just this sort of cyberpunk. We're in cyberpunk now, right?
Yeah,
so
we are.
It's this sort of cyberpunk reality, gothic tragedy vibe that you get in some anime like that.
Well, what's interesting, especially with the direction you're going with that, is one of the things that this reminded me of is a very forgotten funeral doom band from Belarus called Rido, who thematically were all about the idea of technological civilization collapsing.
Rido is a rune. Is it R-A-I-D-O?
R-E-I-D-O. It means it means like absolute zero in Japanese.
Nice.
And like even if you just look at the cover, their first record, Fall, it's just you see these smokestacks along the water just falling into each other. So it's interesting how, because that sample I just played.
This looks sick.
It's very fucking cool.
I would like this.
You should check it out.
Nice. Yeah.
It's very sparse, but I think you might dig it. So it's interesting how we keep getting around these themes that are, and I guess this is where we get into like full autism mode. These themes power up the lasers. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Let me take one last quick break, and then we'll go into full autism.
Maybe I'll get another beer.
All right, I'll be right back.
Did you hear the conversation about podcasting that just devolved into Warhammer 40K?
I heard bits of it.
Yeah, it's
all right.
I could use a coffee, but we're going to be good. I got a second beer.
You'll be fine, Jesus.
I'll be fine. All right.
All right. So, as we were saying before we took that break, it's interesting how we keep revolving, especially with that last song, around these ideas of sort of technologically driven collapse and a sort of end of humanity in a certain way, not a literal physical end, but a spiritual end of humanity.
Which you can read in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think that is something that's explored on this record pretty heavily. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to kind of open by... This is a quick reading. This is from a film called Africa Audio from 1966, I believe, which was one of the early Mondo documentaries from that style.
What are those?
So it was an Italian style, like a form of filmmaking that were basically very shocking, sensationalist sort of documentaries.
Of course.
Yeah, so imagine them as the
Giallo documentary.
I was literally about to say, it's a Giallo documentary in a sense.
Yeah.
Lots of, real footage of people being murdered and stuff like that. But I've got my theories about the whole thing. A lot of people say they're just like sensationalist. A lot of the time it's about like cultures from around the world. It's racist. I think it's more an interrogation of power and violence. So this is the title crawl of the English dub of Africa Audio. And it goes, "The old Africa has disappeared. Untouched jungles, huge herds of game, high adventure, the happy hunting ground. Those are the dreams of the past. Today, there is a new Africa, modern and ambitious. The old Africa died amidst the massacres and devastations we filmed. But revolutions, even for the better, are seldom pretty. America was built over the bones of thousands of pioneers and revolutionary soldiers, hundreds of thousands of Indians, and millions of bison. The new Africa emerges over the graves of thousands of whites and Arabs and millions of blacks and over the bleak boneyards that once were the game reserves. What the camera sees, it films pitilessly, without sympathy, without taking sides. Judging is for you to do later. This film only says farewell to the old Africa and gives to the world the pictures of its agony." And I think, in a sense, that's kind of what this record is about. It's about, in a very, as we always say, corporeal, very death metal way, about the destruction of the self, of the person. And in a grand scheme, what that means for society and civilization as we understand it. Reflected very similarly by the kind of like cyberpunk touchstones we were talking about. It's just a different take on the same general theme.
It's the southwestern city rather than than Africa.
Yeah.
Rather than Africa. Films pitilessly without sympathy, without taking sides. A thing I thought about more similarly in that relation to a pitiless vantage point. Certainly, Ernst Junger in his own writing about war and technology, especially in like On Pain, talks about that, and The Worker. But also, I was thinking, just tying it back to Oppressive Descent a little bit, real quick, but we should spend more time with Fluids, is like, Oppressive Descent has that sort of pitiless view with still some kind of node of a, right? It's the point I was trying to get across with that really long quotation was, it's the music is the sort of whistling in the trenches, right? Junger's drunk friend whistling.
It's the attempt to derive some sort of traditional romance or glory from this very inhuman modern form of warfare in society.
Which requires anchoring yourself in a extremely robust, inhuman metaphysical concept of power.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how am I to position myself here? Well, I can no longer be this little enclosed self, this little sort of, a thing I thought, just an image I had related to that, the Fluids is more like it, because there's this sort of, this romantic element in the Oppressive Descent, the Fluids is more like this, but I thought, the movie Dunkirk?
Yeah.
Dude, that's a fucking sick movie, right?
Yeah.
And it has these little notes of the sort of heroic element in it, like the guy in the fighter jet or whatever.
Yeah.
But, it's terrifying. It really makes you empathize with tons of different walks of people. It's a great movie, but one of the things that struck me the most about it was the beginning of the movie, where it's shot from the perspective of a German machine gun.
Yeah.
And it's just the most it almost makes you identify with the machine gun.
Yeah.
You see the guys running, and you're like, he's getting over the wall. Like, it almost, you can feel the hunger of the bullets.
Yeah.
And the coldness of the gaze.
Well, yeah, and I think that's important to say, because this Fluids record it could very easily be about war. Like, from the perspective of a private or something. It could be about just the... But more specifically, if Oppressive Descent is about World War I, where there's still this idea of, like, broken majesty, Fluids would be about...
that's a fair description.
Yeah. Fluids would be about the modern Iraq War, where it's just violence and fear And just like...
Nobody knows why they're there.
There's no connection to any sort of, like, romantic narrative. But at the same time, the Fluids record, like, we were talking about...
It's like, it's like you're driving in your Jeep and suddenly... you get predator drowned. Or you're driving in your up-armored Humvee and suddenly there's an IED attack that goes off next to you. Right?
Yeah, it's entirely meaningless.
Shit.
Yeah.
And meaningless horror. Yeah.
Well, because we also talked about how every song title on this is just a violent past tense verb. It's just it's just smothered, chunked, quartered, But it's interesting.
Yeah, let me read them through.
Yeah, sure.
Distorted, coerced, capped, redacted, quartered, chunked, hammered, smothered. Yeah. The only one that doesn't fit is redacted, and that deals with violence to language.
I was about to say, because I think it fits very well, actually.
It does. It's very clever. It's the exception that confirms the rule.
But also another thing this record could be about is it could just be about, this is going to sound very weird, it could be about physics. Though these songs could just be titled movement, power, acceleration, and stuff, and they would have a similar effect.
A lot of sort of organic matter under pressure from the inorganic, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's another way. The oppressive descent is like, how do you integrate life with the inorganic, and how does life sort of try to resist with or get a hold of the inorganic?
This is about the inorganic just having complete power over the organic.
Yes, just complete power of the... Yes, this is the organic. And it could place you on the... You could be on one side of the German machine gun where you're just like, you're like, hurry up, bullets, he's about to get over the wall. Or you could be the guy trying to get over the wall. Right?
In this record...
It's both cold... It's so cold that it also engages a feeling of pity.
Well, in this record, it's an automated turret. It was designed by somebody 1,000 miles away who doesn't even know what his code is being used for, and nobody's even sure what the protocols for who it shoots are.
No, sorry. What I was going to say about Dunkirk is like, you're literally... that's close. It's like in Dunkirk, you're literally identifying with the gun.
Yeah.
It's like, not the person. Yeah, okay, I got it. Yeah.
So
automated turret.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, one of the important things about this band, it's easy to just see this as this is the next level of extremity, but I think there's a real purpose to Fluids using, all their samples aren't from horror movies, they're from Live Leak, they're from what would have been Ogrish, they're from just real instances of human misery and agony, and especially focused on the U.S. police and Mexican cartels, which I have no doubt has to do with their location, coming out of Arizona. And there's a constant theme of sort of like amoral or even like above moral, non-judgmental interrogation of power as a concept. And within power, it's the only way power is truly articulated in humanity is through violence.
The ultimate ground of all power, as you said.
Yeah. The supreme authority from which all other authority is derived in the
root of sovereignty.
Yeah, the Starship Troopers line. And I think we
talked about that a little in its own sort of in a different mythopoeic or pre-modern way. We talked about that at the end of the last segment, right?
Yeah. But
the outlaw king becomes the sovereign. But in this case, you're dealing with the power of technology. The power of technology and the power of bureaucratic structures that have no real driving... Because, I mean, they have their own twisted logic, but they don't really... But it seems to be a logic... They run automatically. I was about to say, it's a logic that arises from the machine. Nobody really has control over it anymore. It's just these organizations and these systems of thought have attained a sort of sentience of their own, which is why I believe that the comparison is being made in Fluids that the cop at the beginning of the record and the cartel murder or whatever that's happening on Quartered are the same fucking thing. Yeah, there's a thing happening right now, right? Which some people like to call neoliberalism, some people like to call globalism. whatever, right? Which is the sort of the complete liquidation of capital, of previously existing social institutions, of borders, of peoples, of cultures, the rendering of everything commensurable, and everything sort of subject to technological instrumentalization. And there's always this weird kind of, there's always this sort of evanescent sort of bullshit that nobody believes anymore about, humanity and, freedom and equality, all this crap, right?
Yeah.
The values that were part of the modern liberal democratic nation state or the socialist challenges to it or whatever, those values are still sort of floating around and play some role in all this, but like there's just a digestion process going on. And what it means is that
it's the consumption of people. It's
yes.
the ultimate commodification of the human being into a disposable resource, literally no different. And we have, a legal system that places, in a wrongful death lawsuit that places a price tag on a human being. And it's the natural extrapolation of that into all aspects of society and civilization.
It's literally liquefaction of the body.
Yeah.
At its most direct. Can I say about the police real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's like the police, right, as part of like the liberal democratic state or whatever, the police are supposed to have some sort of legitimacy that comes from the people and the government, and they're supposed to be neutral and blah, 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 right? And clearly nobody sees them that way anymore, except for some sort of people who are stuck in the past.
Some like serious boomer shit, yeah.
Yeah, serious boomer, yes, Republican boomer shit. And especially in some places especially, right, the police really have begun to function more like, with all the norms of with all the universalistic norms of liberal democracy, whatever, collapsing, things are just starting to function like gangs.
Yeah, everything is a cartel now.
Yeah, out west, the cops are one gang, and, if you get on their wrong side, they'll get you, but the cartels are the other gang. And you don't really want to be on the end of either of those barrels. Yeah,
and the unifying thing is the willingness and the authority, whether officially granted or not, to do violence.
It's the actual, yes. Yeah, on the one hand, you've got this abstract system that is sort of processing the world to make us all more... make us better data for Zuckerberg. And on the other hand, you've got, on the ground level, at the same time as this immense abstraction is happening at the ground level, it's just authority invested in groups of armed men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and another thing that I'd like to connect it to, on a more personal, like individual level, is the human reaction to this. And I have a reading for this from, I believe this is volume 2 of Answer Me. And I believe this is by Debbie Goad, Jim Goad's wife.
Do you want to explain real quick what Answer Me was? Because I Googled Jim Goad.
Okay.
I vaguely knew of him. I could tell instantly after reading about him why you like it, that he's one of your dudes, right? I was like, oh, this is where he gets it.
Yeah, but, So Jim Goad, and, well, more importantly, Answer Me magazine was they only did 3 or 4 issues. Mm-hmm. It was sort of a zine type thing that Jim Goad ran with his then wife, Debbie, which was a sort of late 80s, early 90s, just counterculture against everything type magazine.
The counterculture was cool.
Yeah. They would just it would be like, oh, let's do interviews with pornographers. Let's just have sort of juvenile but still cool, just like rants about society and everything. But there's
actual punk.
Yeah, there's something about Answer Me, and the reason it's been so influential is like a core kernel of real. I don't even know. I don't know. Probably like Weltanschauung almost in a way. Mm-hmm. I've got a passage here. This is from a short piece that Debbie wrote. It's called "Nothing But Enemies," and this is at the end. And this is this piece is just kind of a prose piece about how much she hates going outside and interacting with people. So, yeah, it's extremely...
She was ahead of the curve.
It's extremely trench coat shit. You would really love this stuff. The books are kind of expensive, though. So, here we go. So this is the last few paragraphs of Nothing But Enemies. I'm stronger than all my enemies. If you lay one finger on me, I'll blow your head off your neck. No one fucks with me and gets away with it. If someone annoys me, their fate is sealed like a manila envelope. It only takes one time. They will suffer. It may be subtle at first, but their problems will spring up like blades of grass. Their lives will crumble. I'll get justice in the end. They'll crawl back to me with wet cheeks, pleading for me to stop. They're wasting their time. I hold the grudge for life. I savor my grudges. I decide when, where, and how my enemy's demise will be accomplished. Dead, dead, dead. I slam my door. Home again. Out with the bad air. Now I don't have to see anybody. No more problems for now. I walk into the foyer and stand between two full-length mirrors. I raise my gun under the light bulb, letting its black steel reflect back and forth into infinity. There are hundreds of me lined one after another, our movements perfectly synchronized as we wave our pistols. We were too nice today. We allowed the enemy to squeeze through unscratched. We cock our hammers and wait for tomorrow. I like that. So, I mean,
That is, we were talking about how, eventually trenchcoat shit got seen as corny because of what happened with The Matrix. And, also the guys who shot up Columbine. Yeah, okay, that was bad look for trenchcoats. There was this core of a certain kind of cyberpunk industrial aesthetic there that was cool. And that people have forgotten.
And I think a lot of it has to do with what she describes there, which is the hermetic quality of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that resonates. It obviously resonates through black metal. It resonates through the extreme reaches of death metal. It resonates through industrial music. It's a unifying force of both antagonism and intense paranoia, which I think is one of the things this record gets into a whole lot. Is this sense of like... Hello?
Yeah, paranoia might be one of the unifying feelings of our time, right?
Yeah, no, 100%.
We're all in a sort of...
Paranoia, but also
if you're not feeling paranoid right now, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. Paranoia, but also that uniquely American quality of, I'm going to get a gun and I can take people down with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing. And that's where it comes back around to the oppressive descent, I think, in that, like, in the collapse of all of these institutions that had been freighted with so much meaning and these values that are now totally hollowed out, right? It goes back to things like that, right? It goes back to just, she's... obviously the Ernst Jünger soldier in the trenches is different from the trenchcoat psychopath, right? Yeah. But it's this same kind of bunker mentality where the bare, naked minimum of power is revealed, right?
Yeah, which is inevitably always violence.
Yes, and that's how, hierarchies are created and whatever. And it's, all this world that appears to be run on everything but violence, right? This world that wants to nurture you and promote you and empower you and
which just makes the violence that much worse,
guide you towards that's the irony of it, right? It's that there's the flip side of this world, this closed world of seamless pleasure, right? From the Netflix to the endlessly accessible consumer items, which, of course, like, in our own ways, we're all entangled with, right? We're neither of us are sitting in our bunkers right now. But no, we don't have bunkers. We're all jacked into the same shit as you are and inadvertently complicit with it.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that, not to interrupt too much. But,
no, go interrupt. Yeah.
One of the things that this record's really addressing, I think, and trying to kind of pull back the veil from is something that Slavoj Zizek actually touched on.
Zizek.
Zizek, I don't fucking
Slavs.
Balkan states. I don't care. He touched on.
Dude, are you disqualifying South Slavs?
Disqualifying them from what? From me pronouncing their
Slavhood.
shit? Yes.
Well, you pronounce Polish shit good.
I attempt to. Anyway.
Yeah.
So because he makes a point regularly about the relative comfort of authoritarian power versus the kind of slowly dawning horror of kind of neoliberal, like, globalist power. And he was talking about, the instance of the authoritarian father versus the like modern liberal father. The authoritarian father tells his child, you have to visit your grandma because I'm telling you to. And then the liberal father says, your grandmother would really love to see you. I'm not going to make you go, but think about how much it would mean to her. And how the second is much worse psychologically.
Oh, it works by guilt. Sure, it works by sort of... Yeah, it works by petty guilt. You phrased it to me another time, like, you're not gonna go... It's not that you have to go see your grandmother because it's sort of the right thing to do and what one does. It's, you're gonna go see your grandmother because you'll love it. Like, once you get there, kids, you're gonna love it.
And it's awful. And it's like... And really, that's one of the things this record is about, is the idea of... in this, like, supposed civilized neoliberal power structure we have, it's merely a very complex mask on top of the reality of state-supported violence.
Which is always pushed underneath and outside.
Exactly. And it's...
Yeah. And corporate-supported violence.
Corporate-supported violence, gang violence.
Cartel-supported violence, which is entangled with the rest at this point.
Yeah, and they all operate in similar ways.
I should give a plug to a new YouTuber podcaster. This guy Joe Rogan did this really good interview with.
Have you ever done DMT, bro?
Did this really good. Yeah, I don't know about the DMT thing, but I have a feeling he's going to be big. But he did this interview with this dude who had quit the Mexican narcotics force, or the Mexican military narcotics force, out of frustration and moved to the U.S. and who now, like, trains people with this shit, and it's far out. You'll be able to find it if you just Google Joe Rogan cartels or whatever. Fascinating stuff about how this complete devolution of the state in Mexico has just been turned inside out, and how that's already coming. It can't not be because of our drug entanglements, right? It's already operating internationally. Just some interesting stuff there about what does the world look like after a state has turned itself inside out.
Yeah. All right, that's probably a good place to cut this off.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, this is exactly the same shit that happened last time. We're turning into the 4-hour metal podcast.
I think that just means this was where we wanted to go.
Oh yeah, just like fully up our asses.
Yeah, well, Lord knows it's easier than writing it down.
God, it sure is. This is much better than the old writing days.
Yeah,
anyway,
right.
Thanks guys for listening. Real quick, let's do a plug again. So I don't know what sort of degenerate service you're listening to the podcast on. It might be. Does iTunes exist anymore? No, Apple Music.
You can get it on iTunes, but Apple Music is the place to get it.
So you can get it off Apple Music, you can get it off Spotify, you can get it from Podcast Addict or whatever kind of podcast aggregate.
Podbay.
Yeah, any of that shit. You can get it on YouTube. But the important thing to remember is wherever you're getting it, be sure to subscribe to us. If you like what you're hearing and you're on YouTube or one of the other services that offers the option, leave us a comment or...
Yeah, if you're on Apple Podcasts, throw us... Yeah, commenting. I meant to say that before. Yeah. If you're on Apple Podcasts or whatever, if you like it, throw us some stars or something.
Yeah, call us pretentious retards. I don't care.
Yeah, call us pretentious. That's good branding, honestly.
Any engagement is good engagement.
No, so far we've had a shout out to the one guy... DJ, who has commented so far. He left 8 comments on one fucking video. And because we have no other commenters right now, I answered them all. So if you comment, I will engage with you too. But shout out to DJ. He's fucking legit. He's what makes metal.
Oh yeah, no, he's exactly the sort of black metal autist that we really respect.
Yes, indeed.
So guys, smash that motherfucking like button. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
See you next week. Peace.
Later.